Everything you've been told about peace is a lie. They said it comes from control, from perfect planning, from making sure nothing ever goes wrong. But if that were true, why are those who try to control everything still restless? Why do you still lie awake at night, thoughts racing, fearing the future, trapped in endless what-ifs? The truth is, the universe was never meant to be controlled. It was meant to be trusted. And Buddhism holds the map. For centuries, the wisest teachers, the Buddha, Nagarjuna, Zen masters, have all spoken the same truth. Letting go is not weakness, it is strength. Surrender is not giving up, it is waking up. And when you stop resisting life, life itself begins to carry you. Tonight, as you listen, something inside you will shift. The tightness in your chest will begin to loosen. The noise in your mind will fade, like waves receding after a storm. And you'll begin to sense the profound truth. The universe is not against you. It has been holding you all along. When morning comes, you will feel lighter, clearer, more alive. Not because the world changed, but because you finally trusted it. This is not just another sleep story. This is a homecoming, a return to your truest self, open, peaceful, free. Are you ready to release and fall into the arms of the universe? Let's begin. You've just experienced the willingness to let go, to cease resisting life, and start trusting the universe. Before we go deeper, let me share something with you that may awaken something within you. The very thing that you've been holding on to for security. The concept of control is the very thing that has held you captive. The belief that if you could just control all the details, know all the ends before they come, or grasp hard enough, you would then be safe. It's a myth, and Buddhism teaches why that illusion not only drains us, but blinds us to the freedom that lies ready beneath. Tonight, we'll dive into the practice of emptiness, a lesson that turns fear into power and control into harmony. In Buddhism, there is a teaching known as shunyata, frequently translated as emptiness. To many, the word strikes fear. Emptiness is a feeling of loss, of nothingness, of void that engulfs meaning. But here, that is not what is meant. Emptiness, in Buddhist thought, has nothing to do with absence. It has to do with freedom. It is seeing that all that you grasp as real and unchanging is fluid, changing, relative. The work, the relationship, the self, even the thoughts in your head, all of them are devoid of independent existence. They are not in your final control. And here is the secret. Once you realize this, rather than panic, you find peace. Consider it. If you think that life is something to be controlled, every second is a battlefield. You wake up already anxious, wondering whether things will turn out the way you intended. The traffic, the weather, your health, other people's behavior. So much is beyond your control. But you bear the weight as if you could warp the universe to your specifications. No surprise that you are drained. But when you realize the futility of control, you cease to insist that the world conform to your blueprint. You learn to go with it rather than against it. This isn't to say that you become careless or passive, far from it. By letting go of the pretense of control, your actions are more defined, more wise, more productive. Imagine a sailor out on the ocean. The wind and waves are never in the control of the sailor. Shouting and grabbing cannot halt a storm. Yet, by embracing that reality, by learning about the currents, hoisting the sails, and adjusting, the sailor glides with strength and ease. This is the strength of surrender. You are no longer disabled by fear of the uncontrollable. You become competent as a reaction to it. Buddhism illustrates that attachment to mastery is ignorance, in that it posits the self to exist independently of the rest of the universe. When you think, I have to be the master of the world, you generate a divide that doesn't really exist. Shuni Itar illustrates that both I and the world are empty of fixed form. They exist as a co-arising formed by incalculable conditions. You breathe because the trees make oxygen. You live because generations of people made it through before you. Even your thoughts are shaped by languages you didn't create and cultures you didn't build. Control is impossible. Once you begin to perceive the extent of the web of causes as actually island. And yet, look, here is the gift. When control falls away, interconnection emerges. Rather than an unfriendly universe to be controlled, you encounter an alive field of collaboration. Suddenly, release is not loss but alignment. You may have faith that the same mind that enables seeds to germinate and rivers to create valleys is also acting in your life. You need not push the river on. You need only cease constructing dams within your mind. This realization changes how you cling to challenges. Consider moments of loss, the breakdown of a relationship, losing a job, the failure of plans you treasured. The instinct is usually to struggle, to clutch tighter, to seethe life for not being your way. But in emptiness, you realize nothing was ever yours to hold. The relationship, the job, the plan, they were conditions that came into being, thrived a while, and went when reasons shifted. When you cease to call that a failure, you realize it for what it is. The dance of conditions. One door closes, another opens quietly. When you stop holding on, you begin noticing. Modern psychology touches the same truth. Studies on resilience show that people who accept uncertainty and loosen their grip on control experience less anxiety and greater well-being. Their minds adapt more quickly because they are not wasting energy, resisting what cannot be changed. They resemble the bamboo in the wind, flexible, rooted, unbroken. Buddhism revealed this centuries ago. Clinging breeds suffering, but letting go allows life to carry you. You might ask, but if I let go of control, won't I lose my power? It is natural to feel that way, but it stems from misunderstanding. Surrender doesn't take away your power. It shows you where power actually lies. Think about how much energy you waste in perpetual worry, running through worst-case scenarios in your mind that never come to pass. That energy is wasted. But when you give up the struggle to control results, your energy is released to act where it really counts right now with the means at hand in alignment with what island. The effect is not weakness, but efficiency. There's also a profound transformation occurring. Giving up control transforms the way you engage with yourself. Many of us harbor critical inner voices berating every error requiring perfection. These are the voices that arise because we feel that we need to master not only life but ourselves as well. When you can't live up to those unattainable ideals, guilt and shame pour in. But when you know emptiness, you realize that even the self is not an object to grasp. Your thoughts, your moods, your actions are conditions coming and going. Compassion instead of self-hatred emerges. You work with yourself not as a faulty machine to repair, but as a living process to tend. Buddhist masters typically refer to the breath as an object lesson. You can't make the breath always be deep or ideal. The body breathes all by itself, whether you reflect on it or not. But you can greet the breath with awareness. You can let it go. You can ride its rhythm. But similarly, you don't control the universe, but you can live in harmony with it. Breathing becomes a metaphor for release. Each inhale as a gift, each exhale as a release. Another aspect of this lesson is trust. Control comes from distrust. The thinking that if you release, everything will crumble. But emptiness shows that things are already sustained by countless causes. The sun comes up without your doing. The world turns without your orders. Your heart beats without your consent. Trust comes when you see how much is already being born for you. The practice becomes less about getting things to happen and more about letting life take shape. This move from control to trust transforms relationships. Consider how many times strife comes because someone attempts to control someone else and get them to do, think, or feel something. Control creates resentment, but when you let go of controlling others, you make room for authentic connection. You can hear without agenda, love without bondage, and respect the unfolding of another human being's journey. Relationships breathe when control ceases. On a grander scale, this lesson releases you from fear of the unknown. Life is always going to be surprise-filled, having unexpected turns. Attempting to cling to certainty is attempting to grasp water. It slides away no matter how hard you hold. Vacancy illustrates that uncertainty is not a defect, but the natural condition of being. When you give up fearing it, uncertainty is an open field of possibility. Rather than inquiring what if it fails, you start to inquire what if something new comes along. Surrender bridges fear and curiosity. Spiritual traditions worldwide resound with this truth, but Buddhism puts it in the center. Through the realization of shunyata, you release attachment to illusory ground, and paradoxically, when the ground dissolves, you don't fall, you float. Freedom is not in standing on solid ground, but in floating gently on unstable ground. In this sense, surrender is not defeat, but freedom. The teaching becomes even deeper when applied to suffering. Pain is a part of life. This is inescapable. But most of our misery arises from resisting pain, from trying to thrust it away or insisting that it disappear. But emptiness teaches us that pain, like everything else, is transient. Once you cease resisting and permit it to come and go, misery decreases. Your mind no longer places the burden of resistance upon the raw feeling. You find that acceptance can be lighter than struggle. This is not resignation. It is wisdom. It is a yes to life as it is, not as you want it to be. From this yes, new things become possible. Creativity flows. Compassion deepens. Presence sharpens. You are no longer riddled with the struggle to control, and so you can finally fully engage in living. Great masters have always indicated this. The Zen master Shunryo Suzuki once explained, "In the beginner's mind there are many possibilities, but in the expert's there are few. Control tries to force one outcome. Emptiness opens to many. By letting go, you create space for miracles, small and large, that control would have crushed." This lesson is not only philosophical, but practical. You can begin to practice it now in small ways. When plans shift unexpectedly, notice the instinct to resist. Instead of tightening, soften, ask, what else is possible here? When anxiety rises, see if it comes from trying to control what is beyond you. If so, release it back to the universe. When anger burns, check if it's fueled by unmet expectations of control. If so, relax and allow those expectations to melt away. With time, this habit conditions your mind. The tendency to grasp fades, and the tendency to flow becomes more entrenched. With further depth, you start sensing an odd sort of power. The less you try to grasp, the more in harmony you feel. Life glides along more smoothly, not because situations are ideal, but because you ceased resisting them. The current bears you rather than wearing you out. That is why surrender empowers, because it liberates you from energy waste in places where it cannot be expended, and directs it to places where it really counts into being present, kind, wise, and active. Therefore, tonight, as you listen and as you sleep, allow this to settle within you. The vacuity of control is not a danger, but an opening. It is the cessation of depletion and the dawning of coherence. Every time you let go of the hold, you are lighter. Every time you yield, you find power you did not realize you possessed. You are not falling into nothing. You are falling into everything. And the universe, immense and without boundaries, already supports you. When you start to realize the hollowness of control, a new question quietly emerges. If nothing is stable, if every moment is contingent and based on circumstances, then how does anything stay intact? What prevents life from descending into meaningless chaos? This is where another lesson comes in, like an unseen strand woven throughout the texture of being karma. But karma is not what most assume. It is not a cosmic jailer eager to punish, nor a stubborn chain pulling you from one existence to the next. Karma is a web, fine and living, intertwining each thought, word, and deed into a tapestry of interconnectedness. When you know this, faith in the universe deepens because you see you are never helpless victim to fate. You are a co-creator of the universe. Karma, in its real sense, is simply action. Each motion of body, word, or thought puts conditions in motion. These conditions ripple on out, touching innumerable lives, and ultimately return in forms we cannot usually anticipate. The teaching is not judgment, but cause and effect concerning the way things are. If you seed the earth, it does not become rock, it becomes a plant in its season. When you speak kindly, the energy of kindness echoes, informing both the hearer and yourself. If you move with cruelty, the same applies. Karma is not a retribution from the outside, but the intrinsic unfolding of interdependent causes. This is where the metaphor of the web comes into its strength. Imagine a spider's web shining in the morning dew. Every strand ties into every other, and if a section shakes, the whole vibrates. Karma works in this way. Your decisions always have company. Step back a moment, and you can see how the words you bring to a friend resonate in their heart, possibly influencing the way they treat the next individual they encounter. One act of generosity can ripple outward into infinite subtle rewards. Similarly, thoughtless words hurt deeper than you realize, spreading ripples far out of your range. The reason this realization gives trust is that it indicates that life is not arbitrary. Even when, on the surface, things seem to be going haywire, there is always a network of causes that spin what happens. You cannot discern all of the threads, but the patterns exist. Trust is not blind. It is the understanding that what you do counts. That significance is created through connection. In this manner, karma shows the world not as a frigid machine, but as a living organism where your involvement is crucial. And there is freedom inside. If karma were a link that tied you to past errors with no escape, the world would be hopeless. But the Buddha taught that karma is in flux, always evolving. What you did in the past sets you up in the present. Yes, but in this present moment is infinite new possibility. Every aware choice is a new cause, sowing seeds for alternative futures. Despite how knotted the web has been, each moment is an opportunity to spin differently. And so, this is why trust in the universe deepens. You see that, although you can't redo what's already been done, you can always change the way you behave now, and that is strong. Everyday life reflects this by looking at not only the large choices, but the little ones too. How you react when someone bugs you, what tone you use to speak, what you think when you're by yourself. These are all threads in the web. Small things are always underestimated, and we believe they don't count. But the web is at pains to remind us that nothing is unimportant. The world you know tomorrow is fabricated, in part from the decisions you make today. Once you realize this, even the most mundane moment is hallowed ground where your future is being shaped. This lesson also serves to change how we perceive suffering. Too often, when pain occurs, the question is, why me? What did I do to deserve this? But karma is not about blame. It is about understanding that what unfolds now arises from countless interwoven causes. Some personal, some collective, some stretching back far beyond what you can trace. To sit in endless guilt or resentment misses the point. The real question is not, why did this happen, but how do I respond now? What am I sowing as seed here and now? Thus, pain is a turning point, a moment of new pattern weaving. Trust also increases when you understand that karma is not the only play within your own script. Entire communities, societies, even civilizations are entwined in the karmic web. The selfishness of a few can ripple into poverty for many. The kindness of one may motivate infinite acts of virtue. The universe is not heartless. It vibrates with this law of cause and effect. A law that unites us all. When you realize this, you no longer feel so isolated. You realize that your decisions, no matter how minute, are a part of creating the whole. One of the most freeing elements of this instruction is that it erodes the compulsion to control, but does not promote helplessness. In the previous lesson, we observed how control is an illusion. Karma now demonstrates that your involvement remains highly significant. You cannot master the web, but you can contribute to it. You do not have to dominate life. You simply need to add strands of wisdom, compassion, and clarity. With the passage of time, these strands tighten the entire fabric. You might not be able to see the effect right away, but the web never forgives. Each cause ripens in its time. This naturally gives rise to patience. Instant gratification is the push of modern life, but karma suggests that seeds take time to ripen. A sharp word might have a momentary sting, but the power of a soft presence might develop quietly for years before blooming completely. To trust the universe is to accept this timing, to let causes mature when they mature. Your job is not to hurry the fruit, but to continue planting wisely. With this attitude, frustration yields to trust in the slow, steady beat of the web. It also changes the way you understand morality. Rules and commandments tend to feel outside, enforced by authority. But karma reveals that ethical action is not obedience. It is being in harmony with the way things are. When you behave with honesty, compassion, and integrity, you are not obeying orders, you are sowing seeds that naturally reap peace and clarity. When you behave with greed or hate, you are sowing seeds that naturally reap chaos. Morality is merely applying wisdom to the web. It is not judgment but skillful engagement. One of the loveliest embodiments of this is generosity. When you give without wanting, you deepen the threads of trust and goodwill. This doesn't just help the recipient, it transforms your own mind, loosening attachment and opening the heart. The act itself is a seed that enriches both giver and receiver. This is karma at its brightest. The awareness that every act of goodness is not lost, but incorporated into the web from which it can inspire myriad lives. Contemporary science has begun to pick up this reality in subtle hints. Social behavior studies indicate that kindness travels through networks reaching people who may never encounter the initial donor. A single smile can change a stranger's mood, who in turn treats another person more kindly, triggering a series of positive impacts. Karma was expecting this much earlier than research validated it. The universe is always keeping track of the vibrations of our deeds, always sending them through the web of life. The concept of karma as a web further enhances compassion. When someone hurts you, the natural thing is to lash out in anger, to identify them as the only reason for your suffering. But the web shows that their behavior is also conditioned by what they learned growing up, by their own hurts, by forces beyond their control. That doesn't justify hurt, but it opens up the door to forgiveness. You understand that just as you are in the web, so are they. Responding out of hatred reinforces destructive patterns. Responding with compassion starts to unravel them. The Buddha used to teach that the most powerful act is not to punish, but to end the cycle. When you decide not to perpetuate a pattern of harm, you and others are free from repeating it. This is the highest trust in the universe. The faith that even if pain is born, you have the power to decide not to sow seeds of pain. You can break a pattern with awareness. Karma also alters the way you perceive success and failure. Success in the contemporary world is normally defined by results, wealth, fame, success. But according to karma, what is most important are the causes that you initiate. You never can guarantee that your project will succeed, that others will enjoy your work, or that your efforts will come to anything immediately. But you can determine the integrity and intention of your actions. When you walk in clarity and kindness, you have already won because you have sown wholesome seeds. The fruit will ripen on its own terms, on its own schedule, maybe in forms you will never even witness. This attitude brings much peace. You no longer judge your value by instant feedback, but by the integrity of your contribution. Your life is less about pursuing outcomes and more about weaving wisely. Trust develops naturally when you realize that all genuine effort has worth, even if the payoff isn't seen. You start viewing yourself as not a failure when things do not turn out as expected, but as a weaver continuously molding the web by each decision. Karma. Teaching also calls upon humility. Since the web is so expansive, you can never quite know all the causes involved. This implies that you cannot take complete credit for success, or complete blame for failure. Each success results from infinite conditions. Your teachers, your family, the world you live in, even strangers who steered your course without your awareness. Once you understand this, gratitude emerges. You recognize how much you are in debt to others, and how deeply intertwined your life really island. Trusting the universe like this makes the aloneness of life less bitter. The feeling that you are isolated, fighting by yourself against the world, disappears when you see the web. Your life is held together by innumerable unseen threads. The farmer who cultivated food for you, the engineers who constructed highways, the ancestors who passed on know-how and survival. Even the very breath you breathe is exchanged with trees and oceans. Karma shows you that you are not separate. You are part of a great living cavity. Last, this lesson calls forth responsibility, but not the weighty, guilt-inducing responsibility of control. It is the work of presence. Every moment is a possibility to weave wisely. Every thought of kindness, every hesitation before anger, every act of generosity contributes a new thread. The web is not looking for perfection. It only responds to participation. The more aware your participation is, the greater your trust in the universe. You notice that life is not a matter of controlling the result, but of adding to the harmony of the whole. Therefore, as you sleep with this lesson, notice how the heaviness of punishment and fear melts away. Karma is not a chain holding you back. It is a web that unites you. Your life is not cursed by missteps, nor is it random chaos. It is an unrolling tapestry that is spun with threads of endless causality, and each moment presents you with a fresh strand to weave. Trust builds when you are aware that your being counts, that the universe reacts to seeds you sow, and that nothing falls through the cracks. The web encompasses everything, spinning you into the grand symphony of life, and in the symphony you can at last relax. The realization of karma as a web leaves us with a still but profound awareness. Life is not arbitrary, but it is not enduring either. Even the most intricately interwoven strands of cause and effect will eventually be unraveled. Relationships change, conditions change, health changes, societies change. All that you touch, all that you learn, even all that you are, will someday go away. To the mind reaching for control, this is frightening. But to the heart that comes to trust, impermanence is the key to liberation. Without change, there could be no healing, growth, or chance of rebirth. The impermanence of things is not something to be feared, but something to lean upon. Impermanence, or ana, in the teaching of the Buddha, is the rhythm of life. From the tiniest cell in your body to the stars above, all is in motion. This is not a theoretical idea, but something that you can observe directly if you take notice. The breath you are breathing now was different from the one immediately prior to it. The idea in your head a second ago is no longer present. The cells of your body are constantly dying and being replaced. Even the ground we stand on is moving. Mountains form and crumble, rivers flow new channels. Change is not some periodic interruption. It is the very texture of life. When we refuse to accept this, pain ensues. Individuals hold on to employment as though it will be permanent, to youth as though it will not wear off, to family and friends as though they will never leave. When change does finally arrive, the head goes haywire. We made grief greater because we experienced impermanence as betrayal, instead of as the natural evolution of circumstances. To live in trust entails turning this way around, embracing impermanence as the very teacher that enables us to live completely. This awareness can change how you approach loss. The loss of a beloved, the closing of a chapter of your life, the vanishing of a dream, all are sorrowful. But pain need not turn into despair. Impermanence reminds you that the preciousness of those moments was tied to their transience. The blossom of a flower moves us deeply, just because it is impermanent. If it were permanent, it would become mundane. Similarly, each moment of happiness, each encounter, each chance shines more brightly when you perceive it as transient. You no longer hold on to it in desperation but relish it with appreciation. Impermanence also makes the absurdity of grasping at identity clear. We tend to state, "This is just who I am," as though the self was concrete. But if you examine closely, you will notice that who you were 10 years ago is not who you are now. Your mind, your tastes, your phobias, even your body have all changed thousands of times. The self is not a rock, it is a river. Trust comes when you cease to struggle to maintain a fixed self, and instead you allow yourself to change. This allows growth, forgiveness, and transformation, because you understand that no error or role is you forever. It softens attachment in relationships. It doesn't deepen love by expecting the other person to remain the same, but by respecting the value of time spent together. Knowing that your child, friend, or partner is going to change helps you approach them with curiosity to get to know them anew again and again, rather than keeping them trapped in fixed expectations. Impermanence makes love live on, because it keeps reminding you never to assume connection. Impermanence also transforms the way we feel suffering itself. When pain has hold of you, physical or emotional, the realization that it never lets go makes the agony worse. But when you're holding the wisdom of impermanence, you realize that even the most grievous wound changes eventually. No storm rages on forever. No feeling, no matter how crushing, stands still. This doesn't make pain disappear, but it changes how you relate to it. Rather than being bouldered by its bulk, you can hold out patiently with the knowledge that change is imminent. This realization confers unimaginable power during hard times. Hardship survivors relate of a breaking point where they knew this would not continue indefinitely. That realization itself is an exercise in faith. You grow to surf the waves rather than suffocate in them. Buddhism refers to this resilience not because suffering goes away, but because you realize it as a transitory state instead of your permanent self. Another aspect of impermanence is that it frees us from greed. The constant pursuit of wealth, status, or material possessions is driven by the notion that these will bring us ultimate happiness, but impermanence reveals otherwise. Money fluctuates, fame withers away, bodies do wear out, regardless of how well they are maintained. When you accept impermanence, you no longer invest energy in fantasies of permanence. You start instead to wonder, what really matters in this finite life? And the answer tends to turn toward connection, purpose, and inner peace more than boundless accumulation. Impermanence also transforms the way we engage with time. So many put off living and say, "I'll be happy when I get promoted, when I retire, when things stabilize." But impermanence tells us waiting for life is risky, because the future is always uncertain. Embracing impermanence is about living in the present, savoring the richness of every moment without delay. It is not irresponsible. It is vigilant. It acknowledges that this instant, fleeting and ephemeral, is the sole knowledge you ever possess. That recognition increases mindfulness. Each sip of tea, each step, each breath is worth paying attention to. For when you realize it will never return, you greet it with awe. That is why Buddhist masters teach mindfulness of the mundane, not because the mundane is small, but because it is precious in its fleetingness. Doing the dishes, warm water on your hands, the call of birds at morning. These are not interruptions to life, but life itself. Impermanence makes them holy. Impermanence also engages compassion. As soon as you understand that all beings are open to loss, old age, and death, your heart melts. You notice that the one who irritates you is also vulnerable, bearing the burden of change. This awareness does not condone bad behavior, but it makes you react with compassion instead of anger. Compassion develops as you acknowledge we are all on the same journey of impermanence, each trying to be at peace in its midst. Buddhist death contemplation is not morbid, but emancipatory. To confront squarely the fact that you will die someday lets you free yourself from distraction and petty cares. It cuts through your priorities and calls you to live true. You no longer fear impermanence, but rather recognize it as the basis of meaning. The value of life is not measured in how long you are here, but in the depth in which you are present. This is why, then, many practitioners are wont to repeat lines like, "Death is certain, the time is uncertain." Rather than depressing, this reality lends every day its urgency and awe. Science confirms this teaching as well. Physics demonstrates that the universe itself is in a state of constant change, from the minute particles to the immense galaxies. Biology demonstrates the same in every cell. Neuroscience demonstrates that even memories previously considered immutable change every time they are remembered. Impermanence isn't a spiritual principle only. It's the natural law attested by experience. Refusing to accept it is refusing reality itself. Trust arises when you collaborate with this truth instead of fighting it. Impermanence can even change ambition. Rather than working toward accomplishments as beacons of permanence, you now realize that they are part of a moving stream. You write not to leave an immortal work behind you, but to tell the truth here and now. You construct not to gain immortality, but to make your time useful to those who are alive. This change does away with the weight of having to establish your worth eternally, and instead gives way to the thrill of being a part of life's process. In reality, adopting impermanence means you let go of attachment to results. You still do things, you still care, but you let go of the need for things to be as they are. When you succeed, you enjoy it without holding on. When you fail, you learn without giving up. Both success and failure lose their bitter taste because you are aware that they too will fade away. This equanimity is not cold detachment, but warm acceptance based upon trust that alteration is the nature of everything. One strong Buddhist meditation is watching the breath and repeating this too shall pass. Whether deep, shallow, calm, or restless, the breath always changes eventually. This trains the mind to respond to all experience in the same manner. Joy comes up, this too shall pass. Grief comes up, this too shall pass. Rather than wildly oscillating between craving and aversion, you establish a middle place of trust, relying on impermanence to guide you. Impermanence also calls forth creativity. When you release the need for stability, you are open to innovation. Artists will tell you their greatest work comes when they let go of control and let change lead the way. Life becomes a work of art when you approach it in the same manner, open to surprise, open to being molded. Trust builds not because the future is set, but because you are open to receiving it as it arrives. This lesson also destroys the fear of releasing. Humans cling to old ways, negative relationships, or old thinking because they do not want to feel emptiness if they let them go. But impermanence shows that releasing always creates space for something else. A tree has to drop leaves to grow new ones in spring. You also have to let go of what no longer works for you in order to make room for new life. Trust is believing that the cycle of rebirth never fails, even when you can't yet see what will grow. The greatest gift of impermanence is freedom from fear of the unknown. When you know that everything is already in motion, you cease to demand certainty. Rather than holding on to what is fleeting, you open your hands and join in. You get into the flow not as its master, but as its friend. Trust becomes second nature because you know that change is not against you. It is the very rhythm that nourishes you. As you lie with this fact, see how fear of endings dissolves. Endings are not failures. Endings are the doors through which new beginnings march. The night does not destroy the day. It clears the way for the dawn. The falling leaf does not signal death only. It enriches the soil for new growth. Impermanence is the heartbeat of the universe. And when you lean into it, you find peace not in clinging, but in flowing. Trusting impermanence means living awake, unencumbered by fear's chains and attachment's snares. It is to find loveliness in the transitory, resilience in the flux, and promise in the unknown. When you no longer resist the truth of and you find that life does not need to last an eternity to be worthy. Its very transience is what sanctifies it. And in that acknowledgement lies not despair, but faith, the silent trust that each ending holds within it the potential for a beginning, and that the universe, always in flux, is helping you through it all. When impermanence takes up residence in the heart, you start to comprehend that change is not mere random dissolution, but part of a larger unfolding. The decline of something makes way for something else to emerge, and under what appears as chaos, there is order that keeps everything in place. This is where yet another deep teaching comes in, pratisha samutpada, or dependent origination. This teaches us that nothing exists independent and nothing emerges unconditionally. To trust the universe is to know that even during times of confusion, there is a secret order, a tapestry of causes and effects, linking all things in ways greater than the eye can see. This is a teaching that illustrates that all things in life are interconnected. A flower does not grow alone. It depends on the sun, rain, soil, air, and on countless unseen conditions that preceded it. Your own breath at this moment exists thanks to the green stuff on this planet. Due to oceans that produce oxygen, due to stars that ignited billions of years ago to form the elements in your body. What seems to be one moment is in fact the intersection of infinite threads. This is not mystical thought, but the way reality actually works. When life is crazy, it is because we only get to glimpse fragments. A disappointment seems meaningless until you catch sight of the larger field of causes that led to it. An ugly ending seems cruel until you witness the space it made for unexpected growth. Dependent origination calls you to expand your scope to view not only discrete events, but the entire web that brings them into being. This change turns fear into trust, because you see nothing is ever random. There is always a sequence of interdependent conditions occurring. The Buddha explained dependent origination as the root of wisdom. He explained that suffering does not come about from fate or punishment, but from conditions. Ignorance gives rise to craving. Craving gives rise to clinging. Clinging gives rise to suffering. And just as conditions give rise to suffering, conditions can put an end to it. Wisdom, compassion, mindfulness, All of these can interrupt the cycle and bring freedom. This shows that nothing is fixed. If conditions change, outcomes change. Life is not locked into chaos or despair. It is always open to transformation. Understanding this in daily life helps dissolve despair. When hardship strikes, the mind often cries, "Why me? Why now?" But dependent origination teaches that events are not personal attacks. They are outcomes of infinite conditions, most of them outside your control. A storm ravages a harvest, not because the farmer is under a curse, but because weather, soil, and climate all interact in intricate patterns. By viewing events in terms of condition rather than person, you release yourself from resentment. Trust comes about when you realize that life happens through causes, not through judgment. This awareness also calls forth responsibility. While you can't dictate all of the conditions, you can affect the web by what you do, deciding upon kindness rather than rage, patience rather than urgency, wisdom rather than ignorance. All of these alter the conditions for subsequent experiences. Each mindful action contributes a strand to the big web. You may not observe the result immediately, but the law of dependent origination guarantees that no action is ever in vain. Dependent origination also shows how blame is not useful. When harm is done, it is so tempting to target the doer as the lone cause. But their actions also arise due to conditions, their environment, their injuries, their lack of awareness, the culture that surrounds them. This does not justify harm, but it changes the focus away from condemnation towards understanding. By being aware of the network of conditions, you develop compassion. You observe that anger merely perpetuates more negative conditions, and that understanding and wise action are able to alter the pattern. On a deeper level, this teaching destroys the illusion of separation. We tend to live as if we were sovereign individuals, self-created and independent. But dependent origination reveals that no one is separate from others. Your own body is a composition of things that were once part of rivers, stars, and ground. Your ideas are influenced by earlier languages, customs, and instructors. Even the feeling of I is a product of conditions of perception and recollection. This realization is freeing and humble. It shows that your existence is not an individual fight, but one component of a massive networked dance. Trust in the universe naturally follows from this awareness. When you observe the web of interdependence, you find yourself sustained in ways you never observed. The food on your table, the roof over your head, the knowledge you employ, all are the fruits of innumerable beings and forces. Even during doubt, this web supports you. You are not isolated. Life is not chaos without purpose. It is an interdependent web of causes, always creating new potentiality. This perception also reorients the way you encounter uncertainty. When things aren't working out, the mind perceives only chaos. But dependent origination knows that what appears as chaos can be conditions changing in ways you have not yet apprehended. A door closes and you perceive only loss. Yet that closure may create conditions for growth or opportunities that would not otherwise appear. This does not mean every painful event is secretly good, but it does mean every event arises from a web that is larger than your immediate view. Trust deepens when you remember that the order behind chaos is always at work, even when hidden. This teaching also reshapes how you approach goals. Rather than fixating on results, you concentrate on cultivating the right conditions. A gardener does not command a seed to grow. They till the soil, irrigate it, give it sunlight, and have faith that the conditions will support growth. Similarly, you grow patience, practice kindness, cultivate awareness, and allow results to ripen of their own accord. This lifestyle substitutes trust for anxiety, since you know your function is not to control results, but to prepare for harmony. Dependent origination also sheds light on the nature of emotions. Emotions do not emerge spontaneously. They are conditioned by thought, memory, and physical states. Anger evolves when expectations conflict with reality. Joy evolves when connection and gratitude are in alignment. By perceiving emotions conditionally, you no longer identify with them as rigid identities. Rather than "I am angry," you can notice, conditions for anger have arisen. That small shift provides space. You can respond mindfully rather than being swept up. Confidence increases because you understand that emotions are not permanent conditions, but conditional processes that shift when conditions shift. Contemporary science echoes that insight. Systems theory and ecology demonstrates that ecosystems flourish or fail according to interdependent relationships. Neuroscience demonstrates that brain patterns emerge from states of environment and experience. Physics illustrates that even particles do not exist by themselves, but in relation to other forces. Buddhism foretold these teachings centuries ago, with the lesson that reality is not composed of separate parts, but relationships. Trust in the universe feels second nature when you acknowledge that you are existing in a field of relationship, not a random void. This awareness also transforms the way we engage with community. In a society that tends to celebrate independence, dependent origination reminds us that thriving is born of interdependence. Just as a tree cannot grow without rain and soil, a human being cannot thrive without connection, care, and support. Awareness of this diminishes shame in needing help and increases gratitude for those who help you. It also motivates generosity, knowing that your actions send ripples through the web of conditions to benefit others. Even suffering can be changed by this teaching. The Buddha taught that suffering happens due to definite causes: craving, ignorance, attachment. This indicates that suffering is not an eternal bane, but a conditional one. When the conditions are changed, suffering will cease. This is liberation. It is not magic, but a change in causes. When wisdom replaces ignorance, when compassion replaces hatred, when letting go replaces clinging, suffering loses its fuel. This truth gives profound hope. No matter how tangled life feels, freedom is always possible, because conditions can always shift. This viewpoint also dissolves the fear of disorder in global affairs. There are wars, crises, and turbulences that appear to be sheer randomness, but dependent origination reveals they are products of conditions: greed, ignorance, fear, inequality. To eliminate these conditions at their roots is more productive than despairing on the surface. Just as unwholesome conditions bring about trouble, wholesome conditions can produce peace. This viewpoint asks you to have faith that collective transformation is accessible when a sufficient number of people can contribute to altering the web. On a personal note, this instruction instills humility and understanding towards your own errors. Rather than calling yourself broken, you can realize that your thought patterns and behavior come out of conditions. Maybe they stemmed from childhood wounds, societal expectations, or previous situations. This does not justify destructive behaviors, but it provides room for recovery. By altering current circumstances through practice, support, and awareness, you can remake the future. Credibility is deepened because you know you are not set. You are conditioned, and conditions can always change. Dependent origination also promotes an increased awareness of daily decisions. You start to understand that every action, no matter how small, is part of the web. A critical remark creates conditions for suffering. An act of patience creates conditions for harmony. One act of generosity can resonate far beyond what you can perceive. This understanding converts mundane life into sacred engagement. Every moment becomes a chance to intertwine conditions that cultivate harmony within yourself and the greater world. In meditation, you directly experience this lesson. As you sit and observe, you see how thoughts emerge, not from thin air, but from subtle conditions, sounds, recollections, body sensations. You notice how craving draws one thought after the other, how awareness stops the train. This immediate experience eliminates the delusion of randomness. Even the flow of the mind is relative. Recognizing this brings peace because you no longer dread your thoughts as uncontainable chaos. You know the process works because you can affect conditions through mindfulness. Finally, dependent origination uncovers a deep order below the surface of life. What appears random is not without design. What appears senseless is not without relationship. To have faith in the universe is to be in harmony with this design, not by attempting to chart every strand which is futile, but through understanding that no incident is isolated. Every instant is a convergence of an infinite number of causes, and each decision you make is part of causes yet to come. This awareness turns fear into faith, despair into possibility, and isolation into belonging. So as you allow this lesson to settle in, notice how the fear of randomness starts to let go. Life isn't a whirlwind of separated pieces. It's a boundless, interconnected unfolding in which each thread has its place, and each condition leads to the next. You're not lost alone in chaos. You're included in a living web, sustained by conditions manifest and unmanifest, ever-changing, ever-leading, ever-presenting the opportunity to weave harmony. And in that awareness, trust naturally follows. The trust that under the seeming disorder, there is ever order waiting to be perceived. When you start to perceive dependent origination as the hidden order under seeming chaos, a new question arises naturally. If everything is interconnected, what does it mean to live wisely in this web? The response is not to individual freedom, but to something more. The promise to serve others as being indivisible with serving oneself. This is where the Bodhisattva path does not seem like an intellectual concept, but a living leap of faith. It is a leap of faith so deep that one prioritizes the happiness of all beings ahead of individual escape, depending on the wisdom of the universe to take that promise. The path of Bodhisattva starts with seeing self and other are not dualistic. When you see dependent origination very deeply, the edges of me and them are blurred. Another's suffering echoes throughout the entire web. Your own happiness is shared in the happiness of others. To labor solely for your own freedom and disregard others becomes impossible, since the web cannot be healed in pieces. Believing in this reality, the Bodhisattva pledges to tread the path not by themselves but for all. Freedom is shared knowledge. This step needs great courage. The common mind holds on to security to attaining its own comfort first, prior to thinking of others. The Bodhisattva does believe that by facing outward, by making compassion central, one is aligned with the deepest flow of the universe. This faith is not blind. It arises from the awareness that the universe itself is held in place by interdependence. Just as trees provide oxygen without expecting something, rivers flow without holding back, and the sun shines light without condition, so too can a human heart in this endless giving. To live like this is to be in sync with the beat of life itself. The promise to rescue others first, and yourself afterward, is not one of martyrdom or self-abandonment. It is a recognition that when you lift others, you are also lifted. Because there is no line that really divides you, the Bodhisattva believes that compassion is not draining but rejuvenation. Each act of service plunges deeper into strength instead of depleting it, because it springs from alignment with universal truth. This is the reason that great masters, even in the physical frailty, exuded limitless energy. Their lives were sustained not by ego striving, but by the boundless flow of compassion. This path also redefines your conception of trust. Common trust tends to imply trusting that things will go your way personally. But the Bodhisattva's faith is a great deal wider than the self. It is faith that no work of kindness is in vain, even when outcomes are not visible. A gentle word can save despair in a person you see no more. An act of kindness can spread into infinite deeds of goodness. The Bodhisattva's taught us not judge success by immediate results, but believes in the law of interconnection to lead seeds of compassion where they are needed. This promise also transforms the quality of patience. To promise to free all beings is to admit that the work is infinite. Beings are infinite in number. Suffering occurs boundlessly. Conditions change inexhaustibly. And yet, the Bodhisattva welcomes this impossibility with delight, trusting that the promise itself endures. Power resides not in completion but in commitment. Every act of benevolence is self-contained even as the promise goes on and on. This patience is the product of faith that the journey is more important than arriving at a point of conclusion. The Bodhisattva's leap is also a leap beyond fear. Fear comes when we concentrate closely on the self, fearing loss, hurt, or death. But when the heart is expanded to encompass all beings, the self is no longer a vulnerable center. Care shifts outward, and fear melts away into purpose. Trust in the universal wisdom replaces the necessity of personal assurances. Even death itself no longer inspires terror because the promise extends beyond one lifetime. This is the reason Bodhisattvas are described as not being afraid, not because they are beyond pain, but because their faith in compassion goes beyond individual survival. In practical life, this way calls upon you to broaden your perspective in every moment. When irritated, don't simply ask, "How do I defend myself?" but also, "How can this reaction minimize suffering for everybody concerned?" In making decisions, think not only of your benefit, but of the welfare of the larger web. It is not necessary to make great sacrifices. It starts with small acts of mindfulness. The trust of the Bodhisattva happens every time you think twice before speaking ill. Every time you act out of generosity rather than greed, every time you recall that your life is connected to something greater. One of the most essential things about this promise is that it is built on faith in unseen consequences. You may never be able to see how your action influences others. A gesture of kindness may resonate across generations. A teaching given to a child may resonate after decades. Having faith in unseen continuity enables you to act without attachment to recompense. The path of the Bodhisattva is not about fanfare, often going unseen, but its impact is immense. This trust emancipates you from the need for instant validation, grounding your life in profound meaning. The promise also shows the distinction between pity and compassion. Pity looks at others as lower and distinct. Compassion acknowledges commonality of humanity. The Bodhisattva is not rescuing from above, but serving from within the web, having faith that contact heals. This is a non-burnout attitude, because it is born of equality, not superiority. Compassion renews itself when it is grounded in common being. Having faith in this truth enables you to give without depletion, to serve without resentment. The leap of the Bodhisattva also undermines the notion of trust in the universe as passive acceptance. It is not retreating into the peace of one's self while the world burns. Real trust is having the faith the universe is behind compassion, that being wise and kind is not wasted effort, even in times of the overwhelming presence of problems. A Bodhisattva looks the suffering of the world right in the eye, not with despair, but with belief that each drop of compassion feeds the entire ocean. This pledge also changes the way you look at enemies. People who hurt others are themselves bound by states of ignorance and pain. Lashing back with hate only continues the cycle. The Bodhisattva has faith that loving kindness, even to those who hurt, is the way to end cycles of violence. This does not equate to ignoring injustice. It means to react with actions springing from wisdom instead of revenge. Such faith is radical. It does not allow darkness to rule your heart. The path of Bodhisattva also deepens humility. Vowing to save all beings is vowing that you are in the same struggle. You do not stand outside as a savior, but as a fellow traveler. Trust comes from being certain you do not bear the weight alone. Millions of others who have come before and who will come after hold the same commitment, interweaving a tapestry of care that cuts across time and space. This collective power underpins you, reassuring you that your efforts are connected to something larger than yourself. This leap also rewrites how you relate to meaning. Most look to results, possessions, or fame for purpose. But the Bodhisattva's purpose is simple and limitless: to decrease pain and cultivate awakening. This goal does not wither away with age, loss, or altering circumstances. It stays alive as long as there are living beings to help. Trust in this goal takes you through the highs and lows of individual life, providing stability where other sources of meaning collapse. Another aspect of this trust is the ability to act without knowing. The Bodhisattva moves into a situation without knowing what will ensue. Guided only by compassion, this leap requires faith that universal wisdom will carry the effort where it needs to go. Sometimes actions bear immediate fruit. Sometimes they appear to fail. But the Bodhisattva trusts that no act of compassion is ever lost. The web of interdependence ensures that each seed contributes to the greater whole. This promise also dissolves the illusion of lack. The self is afraid that giving will deplete it, that providing for others will cost it. But the Bodhisattva finds that generosity increases space. The more you give, the more room you find. Believing this to be true enables you to live richly with little, because your wealth is not in what you have, but in the richness of your heart. The leap of faith also changes the way you approach spiritual practice. Most traditions focus on meditation for personal peace. The Bodhisattva, however, practices for the happiness of all beings. Every breath, every insight, every moment of mindfulness is devoted outward. This changes practice from egotistical effort to universal offering. Trust increases when you recognize your practice as not individual progress, but as sustenance for the entire web. At its most profound level, the Bodhisattva promise is an expression of faith in the nature of awakening itself. The Buddha said that everyone has the seed of enlightenment. No one is left out, no matter how far gone they seem to be. The Bodhisattva has faith in this reality, unconditionally perceiving the possibility of awakening in every being. This perception revolutionizes how you connect with others. Rather than defining individuals as hopeless or bad, you believe in their unseen potential. That belief itself becomes a power that serves to stir it. The Bodhisattva path is not simple. It requires patience, humility, and a willingness to ride the uncertainty. But it gives a richness of meaning that no ego success can ever provide. To live for the good of all is to ride the strongest current of the universe. This trust sees you through adversity, energizes your compassion, and anchors your purpose. It reshapes life from a single-minded battle for survival into an infinite offering of service. And as you sleep with this lesson, may the boundlessness of trust settle in your heart. It is the acknowledgement that you are not apart, that your life is tied to the lives of all beings. It is the commitment to live not for yourself, but for the healing of the entire web. And it is the faith that universal wisdom encompasses all acts of compassion, however small. In this promise, fear melts away, meaning is deepened, and faith is indomitable. The faith that by serving others, one finds the most authentic expression of one's self. The Bodhisattva's promise to put others ahead of oneself is itself an act of profound faith. It poses, however, an even greater challenge. How is it possible to travel so great a road when the future is uncertain, when results cannot be predetermined, when the world itself opposes certainty? The solution lies not in holding on to approaches or locking into ultimate answers, but in stepping into what Zen refers to as don't know mind. It is not ignorance, but rather the opposite, an unafraid openness to the mystery of life. It is the faith that wisdom is not born out of grasping conclusions tightly, but by making room for the unknown to speak. In Zen practice, don't know mind is the ground of clarity. The common mind wants to label, categorize, and predict. It wishes to recognize who is right, what will occur, and how to get control. But this tendency to cling to certainty blinds us to reality as it truly island. When you already know, you no longer listen. When you assume to possess all the answers, you are missing the subtle truths that are occurring in the present moment. Don't know mind encourages you to let go of this grasping to greet life with humility and newness. Believing that not knowing is nearer to reality than erroneous certainty. This surrender is not weakness. It's incredibly courageous to say, I don't know. The ego resists, however, because it fears that uncertainty equates with inadequacy. But uncertainty is actually the natural state of life. The future is never promised. Results are never completely predictable, and the universe is much more intricate than any one mind can comprehend. To live as if otherwise is to construct walls against reality. To surrender to not knowing is to be in harmony with the way life really is. And in harmony, there's trust because you no longer resist the movement of uncertainty. You enter it with openness. In everyday life, don't know mind can revolutionize even mundane interactions. When you come into contact with another human being, you might think you already know who they are due to previous experience, names, or assumptions. But when you let that out, when you come to them with don't know mind, you greet them anew. You hear more profoundly. You find things you would have otherwise passed by. Trust builds in relationships when individuals sense being understood without being locked into past judgments. This practice creates room for others to evolve as you too evolve. During crisis, don't know mind becomes even more vital. When plans fail or life abruptly veers off course, there is a tendency to panic, to insist on knowing for sure, to search wildly for solutions. But frequently, no quick solution can be found. The future has not yet unfolded itself. At these times, accepting don't know mind permits you to relax in openness instead of fear. It makes room for creativity, patience, and resilience. Trust emerges not because you know what will happen, but because you are open to admitting that you don't and are willing to proceed step by step anyway. Zen masters are fond of saying that don't know mind is the nearest mind to awakening. This is because awakening is not a question of increasing knowledge, but of perceiving directly. Knowledge is good, but it may become a barrier when it becomes fixed in conceptual forms. Don't know mind dissolves these barriers so you can meet life in itself unencumbered. A flower isn't diminished to an object of this type. It is simply viewed in its newness. A moment of silence isn't occupied with concepts of boredom or productivity. It is simply silence. Trust in the universe increases when you encounter life in this manner, since you no longer insist it follow your thoughts. You allow it to be whatever it island. This also breaks down the fear of failure. So much worry arises from the conviction that you need to know precisely how to do something successfully, that errors imply catastrophe. But with don't know mind, errors are merely part of the unfolding. They are states that teach, redirect, and refine. When you let go of the need to always know, you are free to try, to explore, to experiment. Trust fulfills the place of fear because you no longer need certainty first before moving forward. Every step is taken with openness, learning in between. Another aspect of don't know mind is that it has the ability to dissolve conflict. Arguments tend to occur because individuals hold on to certainty of being correct. Both sides will stand up for what they know, reluctant to acknowledge boundaries. But when you go in don't know mind, you become inquisitive instead of adversarial. You listen for subtlety, for potential outside of fixed positions. This is not to say a lack of discernment, but it is to realize that no one point of view has the entire truth. Trust develops in conversation when humility trumps pride, when openness permits common ground to be established in spiritual practice. Don't know mind is developed through meditation. When sitting and observing thoughts, the mind tends to jump to this is good, this is bad, this means I am making progress, this means I am making failure. But when you release all of that, when you just pay attention with openness, you greet the present moment without judgment, you are in awareness itself, which has no need for conclusions. Eventually, this habituates the mind to release its chronic reaching for certainty. Trust occurs naturally because awareness itself is enough even without answers. This method also fosters creativity. Artists, thinkers, and innovators frequently report breakthroughs happening when they let go of expectations and permit themselves to sit in the not knowing. Don't know mind generates the space where new possibilities emerge. When you cease requiring life to conform to your preconceived solutions, You become open to understandings previously obscured. Faith in the process enables you to approach life as an unfolding mystery, instead of a puzzle to be solved. The teaching also pertains to death. So much of the fear of death is because we feel we must know what comes next. Religions and philosophies have each tried to answer, but to be honest, no one knows completely. Don't know. Mind encourages you to stay in that mystery without terror. Death is not a frightful unknown, but an enormous openness. Trust occurs when you no longer require assurances, but embrace the mystery as part of the movement of life. This surrender creates peace, even amidst the absolute uncertainty. In contemporary life, where information is plentiful and individuals value knowing, don't know mind can be revolutionary. Yet information doesn't equal wisdom. You can gather infinite data and yet be unaware of the reality of one breath. Don't know mind teaches you that wisdom springs not from stockpiling facts, but from encountering each moment just as it is. Trust develops when you release the concept that you always have to know and instead develop presence. On a psychological level, don't know mind also allows you to let go of perfectionism. Perfectionists need to know for sure, to ensure outcomes ahead of time before they do anything. This will end in paralysis or burnout. But if you embrace not knowing, you permit yourself to move ahead without requiring perfection. Movement is achievable because you have faith in the process, but don't require absolute certainty. You take each step lightly with interest rather than stress. This lesson also mends relationships with the future. Most live in perpetual worry, assuming worst-case scenarios, requiring surety about what will happen. Don't know mind asks you to let go of those projections. The future has not arrived, and no worry will generate surety. To rest in don't know mind is to embrace that the future is open with possibilities you cannot anticipate. Faith in this trust releases you from the prison of fear. Zen masters tend to illustrate this teaching with simple words. When asked about the nature of life, a master may simply say, "Don't know." In no way dismissive, this response indicates the humility needed for genuine understanding. By the acknowledgement of not knowing, the master opens the door for the student to direct experience rather than second-hand solution. This humility is in itself a trust, a willingness to allow life to reveal itself without imposing conclusions. This practice also resonates deeply with compassion. When encountering someone in pain, the tendency is to explain, to offer answers, but at times, the most powerful gift is to sit alongside them in don't know mind, to provide presence without solution. This humility provides space for real connection, where both can have faith in the unfolding without the need to solve it. It reminds us that trust isn't always about answers, but is sometimes about being companions in not knowing. Don't know mind also develops resilience during periods of shared uncertainty, economic turmoils, social chaos, ecological crisis. The urge is to call for complete predictions, to look for leaders or systems that guarantee certainty. But this guarantee tends to break down, and despair results. Don't know mind realizes that uncertainty is part of shared life too. From this realization, resilience emerges. Communities can react with flexibility, versatility, and faith instead of fear. At its deepest level, don't know mind shatters the illusion of control. Control rests upon knowing. Knowing results. knowing ways, knowing selves. When you let go of this necessity, you find a freedom you cannot destroy. Life is an open field in which every moment is new, unencumbered by fixed expectations. Trust comes not because you are certain about what will occur, but because you no longer require it. As you lie in this teaching, feel how your shoulders relax, how your breathing becomes deeper. The pressure to know, to respond, to get it right dissolves. Replacing it is openness, humility, and peace. This is the brave trust of don't know mind. The trust that the universe doesn't need you to know everything, only to be there, open and willing. And in that openness, wisdom arises naturally like a river finally unobstructed. When the mind lets go of the need to know, a more profound sense of patience starts to grow. When we are free from needing to know, we also learn to let go of needing to speed up. Life does not always move in our timeline, and wisdom is knowing that causes mature in their own time. This is what Buddhism refers to as the Dharma of timing. Not passive waiting, but a working faith that every seed planted will produce fruit at the right moment, not at the whim of desire. The law of timing starts with a sense of cause and effect as a living principle. Nothing just happens. Each moment happens because of innumerable conditions coming together, like waves meeting upon the surface of the sea. But those conditions do not mature immediately. The seed does not flower the day it comes to ground. The child does not mature overnight, and suffering does not evolve into wisdom in a single gasp. The law of ripening cannot be forced. To insist otherwise is to contend against reality itself. Trust is born when we come to rest in this cadence. Patience in Buddhism is not tolerance. It is wisdom. It sees that there are always unseen forces at work behind the scenes. When you exercise generosity, you do not always get to see the impact it has, but the action initiates ripples that travel way beyond your sight. When you discipline the mind through meditation, the transformations could be so subtle initially, but they rewire your very existence over time. It is to have faith that every genuine effort is worthwhile, even if outcomes are unseen for years. This patience also avoids despair when development seems slow. People give up practice or self-cultivation because they do not realize immediate change. They confuse retarded ripening with failure. But timing Dharma reminds us that change usually occurs quietly, such as roots growing beneath the ground prior to a sprout pushing through. What appears to be quietness is usually preparation. Trust is built when you come to realize that invisible causes are interweaving outcomes, even when nothing seems to be different on the surface. This is true not only of individual development, but also in relationships. How frequently do we ask others to change on our timeline, holding out the expectation that they will break a habit or recover from an injury swiftly? But every person matures at their own rate, shaped by innumerable variables. Patience in this situation is not resignation, but respect for the complexity of someone else's journey. By trusting other people's timing, you leave room for real change instead of imposing shallow obedience. Compassion increases when you let go of the need for others to expand on your timeline. The Dharma of timing also changes how we manage disappointment. When things go awry or opportunities fall apart, the mind tends to think that time was wasted. What if those things are only causes that have not yet matured? What if what appears to be failure is just part of a larger sequence that will yield fruit at a later time? To trust timing is to refuse to render final verdicts on the worth of an experience. Any event has potential as nourishment when seen within the context of a greater unfolding. This precept also breeds humility. Our perception of timing tends to be limited, dictated by short-term desires. But the universe works on scales greater than our own individual agendas. A tree takes decades to grow strong, an ecosystem decades to balance, a culture generations to heal. To call for immediate results is to confuse your partial perspective for the entire. Humility recognizes that the timing of life is often more than the individual can see. Trust is the readiness to engage without insisting to set the pace. Another aspect of this lesson is faith in resilience. Seeds do not necessarily germinate in tough soil, but they can remain dormant for years until the proper conditions are present. Wisdom and compassion, too, may appear buried within a person or a people, but given the proper conditions, they will arise. This faith gives one hope, even when darkness is seemingly overwhelming. You believe no act of kindness is ever wasted, that even if unseen today, its potential is alive and waiting to come to maturity. Such an attitude also erases the fear of urgency. Contemporary life celebrates speed, with its fast solutions and instant gratification. But this urgency tends to create superficial solutions that disintegrate soon. The Dharma of timing asks for depth, not speed. It's a lesson that the most lasting changes come with time, healing, forgiveness, understanding, maturity. When you give up expecting immediate results, you can concentrate on putting the right conditions in place and allow time to work. Trust builds as you discover that long-lasting change comes gradually. The Dharma of timing also extends to the practice path itself. In meditation, the mind will wander and progress seems elusive, but every return moment is a seed. Even when the mind is agitated, practice builds underneath. Months and years pass, and the fruits come into view. Peace, clarity, compassion. To be trusting of timing is to continue practicing and not hold on to outcomes. Understanding that causes ripen in their own time. The way opens up through consistent dedication, not sudden breakthroughs. This guidance also transforms how we perceive collective transformation. Social injustice, ecological crisis, and war frequently appear entrenched. Yet history reveals that circumstances change over time, frequently in ways that are not predicted. Struggles that once appeared impossible ultimately shift societies. Faith in the Dharma of timing requires ongoing action with integrity, even when outcomes are incremental. Each step adds to conditions that may mature in ways you cannot anticipate. This way of thinking avoids despair and sustains perseverance. Patience here is not passive waiting. It is active trust. A farmer does not sow seeds and stay idle. They water, nourish, and guard the soil, aware that growth is a time-consuming process. Likewise, you nurture wisdom, compassion, and presence each day, trusting that results will mature naturally. This interplay of effort and patience is the Dharma of timing, doing what you can without trying to force what you cannot. An additional present of this teaching is peace with endings. Causes occasionally mature into closure, not continuation. A relationship concludes. A season of life comes to an end. A dream dissolves. Rather than fighting, trusting timing enables you to embrace endings as the natural fruit of conditions. Just as leaves drop when their time is finished, elements of life must pass to allow for new development. This trust converts loss into thanksgiving, enabling you to celebrate what was without holding on to what will pass. The Dharma of timing also liberates you from jealousy. When others achieve before you, the mind might see the with comparison, but trusting timing reminds you that everyone matures at their own rate. Another's yield does not shrink your own seeds. By honoring your own rhythm, you let go of the poison of jealousy and concentrate on creating your own circumstances. Trust here is understanding that your way will reveal itself when the time comes without having to align with anyone else's timeline. This view also lends intelligence to decision-making. Many people just leap into decisions out of fear of losing opportunities. But when you believe in timing, you begin to wait for clarity to ripen before moving. A few opportunities need patience in order for them to become evident about themselves. Hurrying too early distorts results, while waiting enables conditions to ripen. Having faith in the ripening of causes enables you to move with precision, not with urgency, to the deeper rhythm of life. This teaching also illuminates forgiveness. Anger and resentment often feel impossible to release instantly, but forgiveness ripens over time as understanding deepens and the heart softens. Forcing it prematurely only leads to pretense. Trusting timing allows you to hold space for healing, knowing that even hardened hearts can soften when conditions mature. Patience with yourself and others is an act of compassion rooted in this trust. Even the Dharma of timing applies to wisdom as well. Insights do not come on demand. They mature through experience, contemplation, and receptivity. A lesson you learn today might not penetrate you deeply until years down the line, when conditions in life make you receptive to it. This is also why the same words can be profoundly meaningful at another moment. Trusting timing also enables you to stay open, aware that wisdom arises when you are prepared, not when you need it. Lastly, the teaching brings peace with death. Just as conditions are needed for birth, so for death. When existence has matured completely, death arrives as part of the natural cycle. Trusting timing involves embracing even this with dignity, aware that the universe develops in accord with causes larger than individual will. Death is not a timing failure, but its fulfillment. Trust comes when you can see it as part of the grand rhythm, so that you can live more deeply while you're here. So, as you sleep with this reality, release the need to direct the timing of your life. Seeds mature when they are ready, not when demandingness insists. Efforts ripen in their season, not ever in your eyes. The Dharma of timing is the understanding of waiting, the belief that hidden causes always operate, and the knowing that nothing is lost. By joining this rhythm, you release yourself from worry, build strength, and find peace in the opening of life, just as it islanded. When you start to get the Dharma of timing, patience flowers, as faith in the natural ripening of causes. Even with patience, though, there remains an undercurrent that keeps the heart tied up, attachment to results. Waiting patiently for outcomes isn't the same as being free from needing those outcomes to justify your life. Real freedom occurs when you let go of ownership, of what occurs when your value no longer rests in whether things happen the way you wanted them to. That is the way of non-attachment, and it is one of the most profound expressions of faith in the universe. Non-attachment doesn't equal indifference. It doesn't equal closing the heart or stopping caring. Rather, It equals being fully engaged and releasing the need to control outcome. You sow seeds. You care for them with labor, but you let go of the need to own the fruit as yours. This is faith in its most simple form, because it has faith not in outcome, but in the act itself, in the living dynamic of the universe. At its core is the notion that results make you who you are. Success or failure is personal identity. Gain or loss is evidence of worth. This attachment creates anxiety and fear because results are never within your control. Even with diligence, situations outside of your power dictate what transpires. Non-attachment honors this and liberates you from servitude to results. When you no longer have your sense of identity bound up in what occurs, you operate in clarity rather than desperation. This freedom changes how you relate to work. Most people set goals with fists clenched, gauging worth by accomplishment or applause. But non-attachment switches the focus to process. The purpose is in being present, in living integrity, in being in alignment, whether being praised or criticized, whether the outcome is visible or not. The activity itself has its own wholeness. Work is service instead of self-approval. Trust happens because you understand effort based on honesty never comes to nothing, even when results do not match. In relating, attachment presents itself as holding on to how others ought to behave, speak, or feel. Attachment breeds disappointment, resentment, and domination. Non-attachment respects connection without possession. It permits others to be free, to develop, to change without making their decisions your personal affront to being. Love becomes more profound when it's unshackled from possession. The heart becomes more open when it lets go of the fantasy that another human being can be possessed like an object. Trust in this context is believing that connection does not demand control, that true intimacy finds expression when there's space granted. Non-attachment also changes the way you encounter suffering. Suffering tends to accumulate due to attachment, the expectation that things should be different from what they are. Loss hurts, but the unwillingness to release what has passed makes pain turn into chronic suffering. When you learn non-attachment, you accept loss without struggle. You permit endings to be as they are, believing that fresh starts are always an option. Faith becomes stronger when you see that releasing does not imply emptiness, but room for rebirth. This lesson also transforms your relationship with things. Attachment to things creates insecurity because no thing can actually give enduring security. Money can be lost. Things can rot, but attachment to them creates fear of losing them. Non-attachment lets you enjoy and utilize what is there without confusing it with identity or permanence. Not that one has to renounce possessions, but relate to them lightly. Ownership melts into stewardship where you tend what is in your care, but do not make it the core of your existence. Trust increases as you learn contentment comes from within and not from accumulation. Another insidious attachment is the desire for certainty. The mind wishes to possess the future, to secure results, to keep life in repetitious patterns. But the future cannot be owned. Non-attachment, in this case, is letting go of the need for certainties and living in openness. You plan, but lightly hold it. You take action, but let go of the need for promises. Faith matures when you recognize the universe does not have to follow your lines for life to be meaningful. Non-attachment also teaches a deep lesson about identity. Much of the pain arises from holding to a rigid concept of self. I am this part, this position, this image. But the self changes, molded by impermanent conditions. When you hold to identity, you fight growth and change. Non-attachment frees the self to develop naturally. You no longer have to protect an image or direct how others view you. Trust arises when you see that who you are is not a fixed possession, but an unfolding process, part of the larger flow of existence. This lesson also cures perfectionism. Perfectionism is being attached to perfect results, that only perfect outcomes are worth the effort. But perfection does not exist, and pursuing it creates fatigue. Non-attachment frees this expectation, and you can act genuinely without the fear of imperfection. Errors become teachers instead of threats. Trust grows when you notice that development is more important than perfection, and imperfect steps still have a value in the entirety. The meditation practice provides first-hand training in non-attachment. Thoughts and feelings come and go, but attachment causes disturbance. As you see a thought and release it without pursuing it, you practice releasing ownership. Eventually, this pattern carries over into life. Emotions, results, relationships, all can be received with openness instead of grasping. Meditation instructs the trust that life can go its own way without always needing to grasp and control. Non-attachment also transmutes the experience of happiness. Most individuals are afraid of being happy because they grasp at it, wanting it to never end. This grasping tends to make joy shorter-lived, turning it into fear of its demise. When you cultivate non-attachment, happiness is enjoyed in the present without expecting perpetuity. It is richer for the very reason that it is permitted to fade by itself. Trust grows when you see that joy will come again, that life continually offers new moments of sweetness without needing to freeze them. This vision also melts envy and comparison. Comparison is driven by attachment to outcome. Why do they possess what I do not? But non-attachment understands that each process develops according to specific circumstances. You let go of the need for your outcomes to match another's. Rather, you concentrate on your own authentic involvement. Trust comes once you cease competing with the world and instead start cooperating with it, acknowledging your path as adequate. Non-attachment even extends to spiritual growth. Most seekers hang on to milestones, to ahas, to moments of clarity. But hanging on to spiritual gains is another kind of bondage. As soon as you possess it, I did this, I am awakened, the freshness dissipates. Non-attachment is letting go even the urge to hold on to awakening as a possession. Practice becomes an open doorway instead of a trophy shelf. Faith, in this case, is believing that truth is disclosed not by holding on but by letting go. This wisdom also prepares you for death. The most difficult attachment is to life itself, to the body, to the sense of I. Death is frightening when it is seen as losing possession. But non-attachment changes death into being part of the universal stream. Life was never yours to possess. It was always a gift, a process, a moment in the great unfolding. Trust emerges when you let go of ownership, even of existence, letting yourself fall back into the greater continuity that is beyond the self. The exercise of non-attachment also deepens compassion. When you let go of needing to control results, you are able to be with others more completely. You assist not to fix or own, but simply to serve. Compassion becomes less heavy and more endurable, unencumbered by frustration when results are pending or unseen. Trust increases as you understand that your job is to provide, not to claim the product of providing. Another blessing of this teaching is resilience. When you are attached to results, setbacks break you. When you let go of attachment, setbacks are chances to learn to adjust. You have faith that when one door closes, there can be others opening. This adjustability enables you to navigate through life without being shattered by loss. Non-attachment is not separation from life, but more immersion in its fluidity, based on faith that change always brings new opportunity. Non-attachment also goes with generosity. When you give without attachment, you let go of the need for reward or reciprocation. Giving becomes pure, an unadulterated expression of kindness. The act itself is the reward. This purity fosters trust, because you realize that generosity is never wasted, that it feeds both giver and recipient irrespective of tangible results. This is not easy because attachment feels natural, but in practice, you learn that clinging is not security but suffering. The hand that clings tightly becomes cramped. The open hand rests peacefully. Non-attachment is the open hand of faith, trusting that what comes is enough, what leaves makes space, and what remains is always sufficient. So allow this truth to settle in your heart. The most sincere faith is not in holding on to outcomes, but in letting them go. To live without claim of results is to live liberated. You act with authenticity, love with abandon, give with generosity, and then release it. You have faith that the universe in all its expansiveness will take each seed where it's meant to be. And in letting go, you find the deep courage of a heart liberated. When there is non-attachment, the heart grows lighter, more free, less encumbered by the burden of results. But there is a further question that now arises. What of the perpetual cycles of gain and loss, joy and sorrow, birth and death that still go on? Softening of suffering comes through letting go, but it does not eliminate the fact that life goes in cycles. This is where the samsara teaching comes in, all too often confused as a trap to be escaped. But truly, samsara itself can be the wisest teacher if approached with faith. Rather than fleeing its cycles, you can learn wisdom within them. Samsara is the cycle of life governed by ignorance, craving, and clinging. It is the cycle of habits which generate dissatisfaction, pursuit of that which cannot be sustained, resistance of that which cannot be escaped, grasping that always changes. But samsara is not an enemy forced upon you. It is a mirror of the mind's habits. To look at it as teacher is to see that every cycle of misery contains within it the seed of awakening. The first thing samsara teaches is that trying to grasp is futile. Every time you hang on to enjoyment, it disappears. Every time you pursue success, it is fleeting. Every time you attempt to make life stand still, it gets away from you. The very act of repetition demonstrates the truth. Hanging on cannot provide eternal peace. Knowing this is not despair, but freedom. Samsara educates by repetition what the mind will not learn. Nothing abiding can be understood, and liberty is won only by release. The patterns of loss also teach resiliency. Every ending, though sorrowful, demonstrates that life goes on. A door closes, but air still moves. The sun still rises, and new circumstances appear. With time, these repetitions foster trust that even in the darkest times, life contains rebirth within itself. Samsara's death and rebirth cycles remind us that nothing dies but gives rise to something else. This cycle teaches us to have faith in rebirth, not abstractedly, but experientially. Samsara also instructs in humility. The mind tends to think it can outsmart suffering, that if just the appropriate plan or material is discovered, discontent will cease. But cycles continue, revealing the extent of control. This humbles the ego and calls forth surrender. Humility here is not defeat, but wisdom. The wisdom of recognizing that control cannot halt the wheel, but awareness can change your relationship with it. The samsara cycles also show us the interconnectedness of all beings. You are suffering, but so is every other being. You lose, and so does everyone else. Samsara is a teacher of compassion when you see that suffering is not your own, but something that is experienced by everyone else as well. When you understand your difficulties unite you with others and do not alienate you, then trust deepens. Compassion is the bridge over the common cycles of birth and death, gain and loss. A second lesson of samsara is impermanence in motion. Impermanence is a principle, but samsara demonstrates it. Happiness waxes and wanes, pain ebbs and flows, conditions change. Rather than resist, you can have faith in this movement, knowing that nothing you experience will remain unchanged. This faith abolishes fear. When pain occurs, you are aware that it will subside. When joy occurs, you enjoy it without attachment. Samsara conditions the mind to exist completely in transition without being destroyed by it. Samsara also instructs on cause and effect. Each turn is patterned. You recycle anger to conflict, greed to satisfaction, generosity to union. Life demonstrates repeatedly how causes lead to effects. This is not punitive but instructive. The wheel keeps turning until the lesson is mastered. Trust develops when you realize samsara not as brutality but as a teacher who presents the same reality until you get it. To trust samsara is to realize misery not as failure but as the journey itself. Samsara also instructs the value of mindfulness. When you go through cycles blindly, patterns go on repeating endlessly. But when you make aware, repetition turns into revelation. You start seeing every time I cling, I suffer. Every time I let go, I am at peace. The cycle becomes clear and transparency. Birth, choice. Mindfulness converts samsara from blind wheel to illuminated path. Trust develops when you realize awareness itself can free even amidst repetitions of the cycle. This lesson also dispels the myth that freedom is an escape only. Most people understand samsara as a prison from which they have to escape, but such an approach dangers solidifying aversion. Freedom does not come by negation of life, but by realization in it. The Buddha did not destroy samsara. He penetrated it. Through seeing its patterns clearly, he was liberated from their bondage. This indicates that freedom is not outside, but here in the very cycles which once confined you. Trust develops when you see that enlightenment is possible, even in the midst of turning samsara. Shiva Soul also teaches the value of human life. The wheel encompasses numerous states: joyful, painful, blissful, tormented. Human life, with its equilibrium of suffering and possibility, presents the singular opportunity to awaken. If life were just bliss, you would never doubt holding on. If it were just agony, you might suffocate in desperation. The combination is fertile soil for wisdom. To recognize this is to have faith in the gift of being alive in the moment, with the possibility of learning and evolving. This also changes your relationship with repetition itself. Most feel stuck by repeating struggles, going back to the same errors, the same disappointments. But samsara illustrates that repetition is not futile. It is the soul's classroom. Every cycle provides another opportunity to react differently, with greater awareness, with loosening of attachment further. Rather than despairing over repetition, you can see it as practice. Trust deepens when you realize that each turn of the wheel is an opportunity to grow. Samsara also shows the importance of compassion for oneself. The patterns don't break right away. Habits are deep-seated. Illusions take time to unravel. Condemning yourself for going around in circles just gives more fuel to suffering. But when you greet your own patterns with patience and compassion, you establish the space to transform. Trusting samsara as teacher means that you have faith that even failure is part of learning, that every fall can be worked into wisdom. The cycles also show the truth of cause and effect karma. Your actions create ripples that go out, touching others just as their actions touch you. Samsara teaches us that pain is seldom separate. It is shared. Trust becomes stronger when you realize that healing is not merely individual, but communal as well. Acts of love, forgiveness, and justice turn the wheel not only for yourself, but for many. This turns your perception of responsibility from burden to opportunity to shape the web. Samsara also discloses the hopelessness of looking for permanent shelter in external circumstances. Riches, relationships, health, status, all are under the wheel. To hold on to them as final asylum guarantees disillusionment. Samsara shows that real asylum has to be inward awareness, compassion, wisdom. These are not annihilated by the wheel. They light it. Trust comes about when you stop looking for permanence outside and develop stability within. Another lesson is one of embracing paradox. Samsara is bondage, but it is also the way of freedom. Without cycles, there would be no opportunity to wake up. Without impermanence, there would be no hope for change. Samsara is both bondage and freedom based on how it is encountered. To have faith in samsara is to bear this paradox without dread, to recognize the very thing that enslaves as also the teacher that liberates. This lesson also changes the way you perceive death. Death is not an ending, but a part of the cycle. Birth and death are two turns of the same wheel. Death, fear, is born out of attachment, but samsara proves that death is interlaced with life's rhythm. Every ending gives rise to new beginnings. Trust is strengthened when you understand death as teacher rather than enemy, reminding you of impermanence and calling you to full living. Now, at last, samsara teaches practice power. Without practice, the wheel grinds on endlessly. With practice, the wheel is clear. Each cycle a teaching, each suffering an opening, each repetition a chance. Faith in the universe increases as you observe that even pain has a purpose when responded to with awareness. The wheel is not here to torture you, but to awaken you. Let this lesson remain in your heart. Then, samsara is not just a trap to escape, but a teacher to learn to trust. Its cycles are mirrors reflecting where clinging entraps and where wisdom can emerge. Every spin of the wheel teaches lessons of impermanence, compassion, humility, and perseverance. When you learn to no longer fear samsara and instead listen to it, you find that even in pain the universe is leading you to freedom. And in trusting this, the wheel itself becomes the way. When samsara is realized as not a punishment but an instructor, The cycles of pleasure and pain become teachers instead of prisons. But even with that knowledge, the mind tends to swing to extremes. It grabs on to hard certainty one moment and then fizzles out into debilitating doubt the next. Both of these keep you stuck. Certainty blinds, doubt paralyzes. The solution for the Buddha was the middle way, a path that skirts the extremes and uncovers harmony with the universe. To move in this way is to have faith not in fixed points, but in equilibrium itself. A faith that develops from exposure, not control. The middle way is no compromise of the extremes, but a greater freedom that overcomes them. Certainty demands complete solutions, proclaiming reality absolute and unmovable. Doubt, however, removes all confidence, holding you suspended in indecision. The middle way acknowledges that both extremes pervert truth. Life is dynamic, complicated, and interconnected. To demand fixed certainty is to veto change. To be overwhelmed by doubt is to veto possibility. Trust happens when you release both and move steadily in the middle, reacting to conditions as they evolve. This rule applies first to how you perceive truth itself. Certainty tends to stick to dogma, to rigid belief in how things have to be. But the universe always has more depths to reveal. What was certain yesterday can be disproven today. To hold on to rigid certainty is to shut the door to learning. Doubt, however, never trusts any path but keeps questioning without ever fully committing. The middle way respects inquiry while also permitting practice. It weighs openness to learning against the trust to act. This balance in itself is an act of faith, a faith that wisdom is made deeper, not by clinging to answers, but by moving steadily in presence. The middle way also informs how you approach pleasure and pain. Certainty hovers about pleasure as ultimate good, seeking endless indulgence, while doubt, despair at suffering, convinced it means failure. But both these extremes warp reality. Pleasure and suffering are the natural conditions of life, neither eternal nor determinative. To practice the middle way is to encounter both without attachment or aversion, to have faith that they are not terminal. This faith enables you to live life to the fullest without being a slave to craving or fear. In everyday life, extremes are always looming. One instant the mind demands, "I know precisely how things must be," and the next it murmurs, "Nothing is important. I can trust nothing." Both are snares. The middle path instructs you to stop, to breathe, to proceed without holding on to either pole. This takes humility, the ability to say you don't know enough, and courage, the ability to proceed despite not knowing. Trust is when you rest not in extremes, but in the openness of balance. This is true also for relationships. Certainty in relationships shows up as control, requiring others to play by your script. Doubt shows up as insecurity, never trusting the other's love or loyalty. Both extremes smother connection. The middle way makes room. You trust without requiring guarantees. You love without requiring control. Balance here creates intimacy built on freedom, not fear. Trust grows when both are free to be themselves, growing and changing, without becoming stuck in extremes of possession or suspicion. The middle way also changes how you work toward goals. The certainty calls for perfection, requiring that all should go according to plan. Doubt destroys effort, reminding that nothing will ever work. Both extremes create suffering. The middle way honors that effort is important, but results are unpredictable. You proceed with genuineness. You adapt as circumstances unfold, and you let go of the need for control. This equilibrium makes persistence without rigidity and faith without naivety. Trust develops when you tread this consistent path, respecting effort and impermanence. In spiritual practice, the middle way is critical. They either hold on to certitude, convinced they've reached ultimate truth, or they are immersed in doubt, questioning the worth of practice in the first place. Both bar awakening. Practice without attachment to outcome is what the middle way invites. Faith in the process, without hanging on to conclusions. You sit in meditation not to get to some ideal destination, but to greet this moment completely. Certainty would require enlightenment. Now doubt would preclude it is possible. The middle path lies in the opening, believing that wisdom matures of its own accord through consistent presence. This way also destroys the pretense of mastery over knowledge. Certainty thinks I know and holds on to fixed positions. Doubt thinks I can never know and dissolves into inactivity. The middle ground speaks, I will continue to learn. This stance keeps the mind flexible, open to being surprised, open to changing. It is an act of faith in the unfolding of life itself. A faith that truth is not a thing to possess, but a living meeting. The further aspect of the middle way is its capacity to resolve conflict. Extremes tend to breed division, both sides holding on to certainty, unwilling to notice subtlety, or lapsing into hopelessness that anything can be resolved. The middle way does not cancel out differences, but keeps them in suspension, reaching for wisdom beyond polarities. Balance is not passivity, but listening actively, patience and openness to complexity. Trust is earned when you notice that you can have harmony not by conquering one side, but by moving in the middle. Middle way also provides counsel in the presence of fear. Certainty demands complete safety, attempting to do away with risk altogether. Doubt demands danger lurks around every corner, rendering life paralyzing. Both are unreal. Middle way embraces risk as a part of life, but never allows itself to be controlled by fear. You make wise precautions, but you also live your life to the fullest. Trust here implies confidence in your capability to deal with conditions as they occur without insisting on impossible assurances. This lesson also extends to how you interact with time. Certainty holds on to set plans, insisting that life happen on time. Doubt despairs when plans go awry, believing nothing will succeed. The middle way permits planning while embracing change, having faith in timing without imposing it. This equilibrium fosters patience, enabling you to move without fear, knowing that the path will unfold in its own pace. In the world of knowledge, the middle way also resolves arrogance and nihilism. Arrogance holds on to absolute certainty. I know the truth. Nihilism dissolves in doubt. There is no truth. Both distortions warp reality. The middle way ambles with humility. There is truth, but I glimpse it only partially. This humility promotes openness, enabling ongoing learning. Trust emerges when you settle in the unfolding process of discovery, instead of insisting on final answers. The middle path also fosters compassion. Certainty tends to give rise to judgment, pigeonholing the world into right and wrong, worthy and unworthy. Doubt gives rise to indifference, freezing action for fear of nothing making a difference. The middle path reconciles discernment and empathy, so that you can perceive harm but not judge the person as a whole. This reconciliation gives rise to compassion based on understanding, a compassion that believes in the possibility of transformation in all beings. This principle also revolutionizes how you handle internal conflict. The mind tends to oscillate between self-confidence and self-doubt. 1 minute thinking you can do something, the next you are worthless. Both are distortions of reality. The middle way helps you observe strengths and weaknesses objectively without hanging on either identification. You believe not in perfection, but in the ability to expand. This balance steadies the heart, releasing you from the violence of extremes. The middle way also shows that trust itself is balance. Excessive certainty and trust turns into blind faith, disregarding reality. Excessive doubt and trust dries up, folding into cynicism. Real trust is in the middle. It doesn't deny uncertainty, nor does it require guarantees. It accepts impermanence and interdependence, and puts its faith not in definite results, but in the unfolding process of life itself. This balance also transforms the way you perceive freedom. Certainty holds on to fixed order, and doubt falls into chaos. The middle way shows freedom as the capacity to flow with life's current without becoming stuck in either extreme. It is the freedom to respond, to adjust, to stay connected in presence. Trust increases when you understand. Freedom isn't achieved through rigid control or complete surrender, but through balance between effort and release. Marav, the deeper level, the middle way is harmony with the universe itself. Extremes come from the ego's desire to control, to define, to secure. Balance comes from trust that the universe already has a rhythm. When you harmonize with that rhythm, you find peace. The middle way is not about imposing balance, but about finding the balance that already exists. To walk thus is to live attuned to reality, neither blinded by certitude nor deflated by doubt. Let this lesson then rest with you. Faith in the middle way is faith in balance itself. It is the refusal to become ensnared in the extremes, the willingness to walk steadily between them, the humility to continue learning, and the courage to continue moving. By shunning the poles of dogmatic certainty and bottomless doubt, you find a harmony with the universe that neither one can provide. Within it, trust is not an effort, but a natural way of being firm, open, and unencumbered. When middle way balance calms the heart, you start to feel a subtler truth. Harmony is not only in the way you move from extremes, but also in the spaces where there is nothing to do. Beyond the battle of certainty and doubt, beneath the din of thinking, are holes, little holes of quiet that are easily overlooked. These stops are not emptiness in the usual sense, but portals into something immense, direct contact with universal intelligence. To believe in the silence between thoughts is to make room for the profoundest wisdom to emerge, not through doing something, but through quieting down. When you meditate, thoughts come like waves, rising and falling and rising and falling. The mind tends to identify with the waves, thinking that only the content of thought contains truth. But if you listen attentively, you can see there is a gap between one thought and the next. It can be fleeting, so subtle that it goes unnoticed. But within this gap there is clarity. There is no conflict, no self, no narrative, only stillness. This stillness does not come from the mind, but is uncovered when the mind quiets. Having faith in this gap is having faith in the presence of a wisdom greater than thought. Most are made uncomfortable by silence, because they assume it to mean lack. They are in such a hurry to fill holes with words, distractions, or mental clutter. But silence is not empty. It is rich with possibility. It is the soil from which thoughts emerge and into which they disappear. Without silence, there would be no room for sound. Without the gap, there would be no place for thought. To rest in silence is to come back to the source, to acknowledge that wisdom is not in the mind alone, but in the space in which it resides. This silence instructs humility. The mind boasts of knowledge, analysis, and argument. But there is no analysis, no conclusion, no certainty in the gap. There is only presence. To rest, there is to admit that the universe is greater than the intellect. That truth cannot be trapped by words alone. This humility is not enfeebling. It is freeing. It frees you from the jail of ceaseless mental activity and opens you to deeper intelligence already integrated into being. Silence between thoughts also encourages trust because it is unafraid. Fear emerges in tales the mind weaves about what may happen, what can go wrong, what has been lost. In the space, none of these tales are present. For a split second, you are free. That freedom is not created. It exists and appears when the thinking fades out. Trust becomes deeper when you understand that peace is not a distant thing to be attained, but something which can be reached in the gaps instantly. This quietness also cures the fixation with identity. Thoughts continuously tell you who you are, what are your roles, what are your achievements, what are your failures. But in the space, the stories go quiet. There is no self to be defended, no identity to maintain, only awareness itself, open and expansive. To be in this silence is to savor non-self directly, to notice that identity is thought's construction, not being's nature. Trust deepens when you feel yourself, not as a static thing, but as awareness itself. The gap also shows us the interconnectedness of life. Thought separates reality into self, and other here and there, into subjects and objects. In quiet, these distinctions disintegrate. What we are left with is not difference but oneness. Awareness is not within you or without. It is all around. Trust becomes more profound when you see that the universe is not something separate to be overcome, but something in which you already reside, most transparently shown in quiet. This quiet is also a breeding ground for creativity. Most breakthroughs come not when the mind is feverishly active, but when it rests during a walk, in the stillness before sleep, in the quiet of rest. The space permits the unconscious to emerge, insights to come unbidden. To trust quiet is to trust that wisdom arises not only through effort, but through receptivity. By respecting the gap, you allow room for inspiration to arise spontaneously. The habit of trusting silence also changes the way you connect with emotions. Powerful emotions tend to have agitated thoughts. Anger brews narratives of blame. Fear builds narratives of threat. Sadness weaves narratives of loss. But if you are in silence, even for a while, you discover that emotions also are waves coming and going through awareness. The space uncovers that you are not the same as anger, fear, or sadness. They come, they go, but consciousness stays on. Trust builds as you realize that even the most powerful emotions cannot overpower the tranquility that contains them. Silence also conditions patience. The mind desires answers now, but silence conditions waiting. There is no hurry, no urgency, no need for solution in the gap. You relax, and in relaxing, clarity matures on its own. As fruit ripens in its season, wisdom opens in silence. Embracing this process releases you from impatience to greet life without reaching for instant answers. The space between thoughts also reflects impermanence. Each thought comes and goes, with silence in between. Learning this rhythm teaches that nothing lasts, not even pain. The silence shows continuity below change, a calm presence that encompasses all variations. Trust develops when you see that below the storm of life, awareness never wavers. This stillness can be practiced in everyday life as well. Between breaths, be still. Between tasks, pause for a moment in silence, even in busyness. Microspaces open up waiting at a red light, drinking tea, hearing a friend talk. These are not moments of idleness, but calls to come home to the source. When you respect them, you condition the mind to have faith in stillness over perpetual motion. The stillness between thoughts also discloses the nature of freedom. Freedom is not the capacity to manage every condition, but the capacity to rest in awareness independent of conditions. In the space, you find freedom immediately, not freedom to do something, but freedom from having to do something. This freedom is the nature of trust, because it demonstrates that peace is independent of outside conditions, but your willingness to rest in stillness. Many traditions describe silence as the language of the universe. Words divide, but silence unites. Silence is where prayer deepens, where meditation opens, where communion with the sacred occurs. The silence between thoughts is not absence, but presence itself, the presence of the infinite within the finite. Trusting this silence is trusting that you are always held within something greater than the mind can conceive. This practice also dispels fear of death. Most of the fear of death arises from the conviction that awareness will cease to exist. But in meditation, each gap reveals awareness devoid of content. Thoughts cease, yet awareness continues. This direct experience suggests that awareness does not depend upon thoughts or identity. Trust increases when you realize that what you are is not the stream of thought, but the silence that encloses them. Mara's silence between thoughts also educates us about compassion. When you sit in stillness, the frenzied judgments of the mind cease. You no longer categorize people by label or narrative, but look at them with newly opened eyes. Compassion emerges spontaneously because silence brings forth connection from judgment. Trust develops when you know love not as feeling, but as the spontaneous expression of stillness. In the absolute sense, the gap is a glimpse of nirvana. Nirvana is not some distant place, but the cessation of clinging, the letting go of illusion. Each gap shows this in so many words. For that instant, there is no craving, no aversion, no illusion of self. There is only freedom. To settle into these glimpses is to believe that freedom is not around the corner, but already available in the pauses you ignore. So let this truth settle. The space between thoughts is not emptiness, but the nature of being. It is the field in which fear is melted, where identity relaxes, where compassion is born, and where wisdom is revealed without an effort. To have faith in this silence is to have faith in the universe itself, not by words or ideas, but by direct experience. Each interval is an invitation, each pause a doorway. In the process of learning to rest there, you find that the most profound wisdom of life is present waiting in the stillness between thoughts. When you find the silence between thoughts, you find that wisdom isn't always in accumulation, but frequently in the space unvisited by noise. Out of this silence arises a more profound way of perceiving, one that is free from the burden of assumptions, memory, and conclusions. This is the perception that Zen refers to as beginner's mind. It is not naivety, but an intentional openness, a faith that the unknown embraces life more richly than tired certainty. To live with beginner's mind is to let go of the hold of past conditioning and approach each moment afresh, as if for the first time. Beginner's mind is wrongly thought of as emptiness of knowledge, but it is not ignorance. It is openness. It involves coming to each experience, however familiar, without the hubris of "I already know." When you hold on to what you already know, you perceive only what you can put into your categories. When you come with beginner's mind, you pay attention to details you would have otherwise overlooked. Life gets vivid again because you let it show itself without being pushy to fit into familiar patterns. Trust in the world becomes stronger when you allow every moment to surprise you rather than mapping it into a repeat of what happened before. One of the strongest barriers to trust is conditioning through memory. The past hurts tell you it will happen again. Past disappointments whisper, "Do not attempt." Past achievements even hold on telling you that things must repeat in the future. Beginner's mind shatters this chain. It remembers past, but does not allow it to hold the present captive. By letting go of conditioning, you permit life to demonstrate to you what it is in the moment, and not as it was in the past. This is not forgetting the past, but moving beyond its control. This mindset also changes relationships. Usually, you relate to beloved ones through the lens of past history, expectations of how they will respond, judgments from old battles, labels assigned many years ago. Beginner's mind enables you to greet them anew, as though you'd never laid eyes on them before. This openness has the power to dispel resentment and revive curiosity. Trust will increase when you cease assuming and begin listening. When you look at the other as a dynamic creature rather than an unchanging character. Beginner's mind also transforms learning. A lot of us learn with the weight of already needing to know, afraid of making mistakes or holding on to what we think we know. But learning involves humility, the ability to be empty, to not know. Beginner's mind eliminates the fear of failure because each step is discovery. You are not establishing knowledge, but revealing truth. This process makes even errors beneficial because they bring new avenues instead of end decisions. You have faith in the learning process when you let go of the need to already be an expert. This instruction is particularly necessary in spiritual practice. Experienced practitioners over time can become snared by progress ideas. I should be less nervous by now, more evolved, more conscious. These expectations cause frustration. Beginner's mind allows you to sit in meditation as if for the first time without expectation of outcome. Each breath is fresh, each moment different. This freshness releases the heart to trust because you no longer evaluate practice by comparison, but by presence. Beginner's mind also fosters creativity. As long as you hold on to formulas or previous successes, creativity dies. But when you confront a blank sheet of paper, a canvas, or a problem with beginner's mind, anything is possible. You don't presuppose the path, you discover it. Great minds and artists write of returning to childlike awe, where curiosity isn't jaded with cynicism. Faith in creativity increases as you let the unknown rather than fixing it within what you already know lead you. This lesson also breaks down the fixity of identity. The self likes to hold on to fixed labels. I am this sort of person. I am not able to change. I always do this improperly. These labels are just conditioned accumulations. Beginner's mind leads the way to change. It helps you to look at yourself, not as a completed product, but as ever-unfolding process. When you stop holding on to stories about yourself and let yourself be new, evolve, surprise even yourself, trust deepens. Beginner's mind shows you beauty in the places you least expect it. Walking down the same street comes alive with details previously unnoticed. The feel of bark, the pattern of light, the sound of wind. Familiarity blunts perception, but beginner's mind revives it. This newness is not fantasy. It is reality as seen without the veil of habit. Trust develops when you discover that life is always presenting richness, if only you permit yourself to notice. Another gift of beginner's mind is the softening of judgment. The conditioned mind immediately labels good or bad, success or failure, right or wrong. Beginner's mind puts these judgments on hold. It does not say, I already know, but instead asks, what is this? That openness makes room for compassion, for understanding, for patience. Trust comes when you no longer put life in boxes, but let it unfold its richness. Beginner's mind also readies you for not knowing. The future is unpredictable, and the conditioned mind dreads this. It holds on to plans, to expectations, to the fantasy of knowing. Beginner's mind embraces the unknown because it has already let go of the need to anticipate. It says, this is new. Let's see. This receptivity converts fear into curiosity. Trust becomes stronger when you see that the unknown is not a danger, but the very ground where life happens. This state of mind also erases arrogance. Knowledge can induce pride, leading you to think you have clearer vision than anyone else. Beginner's mind keeps you humble, and whatever you have learned still leaves the universe very wide. Every second has mysteries that cannot be fully comprehended. This humility is not weakness, but strength, because it makes you remain receptive to learning. Trust develops when you release the illusion of mastery and accept the infiniteness of discovery. Beginner's mind also changes conflict. Arguments tend to come from fixed positions, confident that you already know the other's intention or your perspective is absolute. When you approach with beginner's mind, you approach with openness. Maybe I don't see it all. Maybe there is more to learn. This heart set quiets defensiveness and lets dialogue. Trust grows when you approach conflict, not with stubbornness, but with curiosity. In action, developing beginner's mind means awareness of habit. Observe when you brush off an experience as commonplace, when you think you already know, when you judge automatically. In the process, stop. Ask, what if I don't see? What if this is new? This effortless shift expands perception. It does not destroy knowledge, but stops it from closing doors. Every stop becomes an invitation to perceive anew. This is also true in teaching of aging. As we age, we tend to hold on to identity more than ever before, believing that growth is the province of the young. Beginner's mind dispels this fantasy. It reveals that newness has nothing to do with age, but with mindset. A child can be open, but so can a senior who does not allow conditioning to seize up perception. Trust increases as you know that awe is always accessible, regardless of how old you get. Beginner's mind even changes the way you respond to suffering. Conditioned mind tells you, I know this pain. It always devastates me. Beginner's mind tells you, this is new. Let me look at what it is now. In encountering suffering anew, you might pay attention to details that were hidden before, the fleeting nature of the sensations, the space around them, the strength within you. Trust develops when you cease rehashing old stories about pain and start perceiving each moment as new. This is also the attitude that changes gratitude. Familiar blessings, food, shelter, friendship tend to become background noise due to habit. Beginner's mind brings appreciation back. You savor food as though for the first time. Experience gratitude for shelter as though just discovered. Value companionship as though never previously experienced. Trust grows when you realize that abundance is not limited but invisible, hidden behind habits' dullness. In its deepest expression, beginner's mind is itself faith. To let go of conditioning is to take the jump into the unknown, to have confidence that the universe supports you even when you cannot anticipate. It is willingness to greet each moment as if it were the first time, not by holding on to past maps, but by walking in openness. This trust does not dissolve memory or knowledge, but keeps them from closing doors. It makes you alert, curious, alive. So let this truth sink into you. Beginner's mind is the entrance to trusting the unknown. It is the bravery to live anew, the humility to say not knowing, and the trust to greet each moment as it were the first time. By letting go of past conditioning, you realize that the universe is not repeating itself, but fashioning itself anew in each breath. And in that freshness, trust is no longer effort, but the natural state of being awake. When beginner's mind opens the door, you start noticing that freshness is not only about greeting each moment without conditioning, but also about freeing the very sense of who it is that greets the moment. Underneath the humility and curiosity is a deeper question. What precisely is this I that makes ownership of experience? To meet life with an open heart takes more than letting go of assumptions. It takes letting go of the ego boundaries themselves. This is the core of the teaching of non-self, or anatta, and it's possibly the most profound act of trust. To let go of the solid self you hold on to is to release into the river of the universe, becoming one with something much larger than the self you thought you were. The concept of non-self tends to unsettle individuals since identity seems like the anchor of stability. Without me, what is left? But Buddhism instructs that what we refer to as the self is not unchanging core, but a network of conditions. Body, feelings, perceptions, thoughts, consciousness, arising and passing in a relentless stream. None of these are unchanging. None are absolutely under your control, and none can be identified as the true I. If you look close, self dissolves into a process, a flow. If you accept this truth, is to let go of the illusion of solidity and find freedom in fluidity. Identifying with self causes infinite suffering. You defend your image, guard your pride, pursue validation, fear rejection, and resist change, because you think a fixed I needs to be saved. This thinking makes you fragile, since life forever challenges the self you attempt to maintain. One insult undermines identity. One failure seems like destruction. One change rocks your foundation. But if you realize that the self is not permanent, threats no longer have the power. An insult brushes against transitory conditions, not an infinite self. Failure becomes criticism, not oblivion. Change becomes normal, not frightening. Trust happens when you let go of the burden of protecting an illusion. Non-self also alters how you feel about relationships. So much pain arises from believing you are separate from others, a solitary being fighting for existence. But when you understand the edges of self are permeable, the illusion of separation vanishes. The oxygen you inhale passes through millions of beings. The bread you consume is based on earth, sun, and rain. Your mind is formed by centuries of inherited languages and cultures. You are not alone. You are woven. To believe this is to realize that tending to others is not sacrifice but tenderness for the whole that you are a part of. Compassion is deepened when self and other dissolve into one. The doctrine of non-self also frees you from comparison. When you think in terms of fixed self, you are always comparing it with others who are wiser, wealthier, more powerful, more popular. Such comparison creates envy and insecurity. But once self is conceptualized as fluid, comparison is meaningless. You are not a fixed object to be measured. You are a process unrolling in one's own way. Trust increases when you no longer have to establish yourself as better than others, but let yourself become part of the cosmic flow. Every individual a variation of the same gigantic reality. In meditation, the understanding of non-self can be seen directly. Inner joy, you watch thoughts, feelings, and sensations. You see they occur by themselves. You don't dictate the next thought or the next sensation. They come, linger for a moment, and vanish. Observe closely, and you can't see a thinker other than thoughts, or a feeler other than feelings. There is simply the flow of experience. This is not abstract philosophy, but immediate awareness. The self you so stubbornly defend does not exist. Trust comes when you release the requirement to find a rock-solid I and rest in awareness itself. Non-self dissolves fear of death as well. Fear is created because the self feels it will be destroyed. But if there is no fixed self in the first place, what is there to destroy? Life is an ongoing flow of conditions. Birth and death are transitions within that flow. The body changes moment to moment. Cells dying and being reborn. Identity changing year to year. Death is a part of this cycle, not the annihilation of an infinite self. Trust emerges when you perceive death as not loss, but as part of the great cycle, the universe being transformed through you. This lesson also redefines freedom. It is thought by many that freedom is expressing the self without constraint, asserting identity at any cost. But this kind of freedom is a bondage because the self has to be constantly defended, protected, and promoted. Non-self shows a greater freedom, freedom from self. When you release your identification, you are no longer trapped by its expectations. You are free to act freely, gracefully, genuinely, without having to prove or defend. This is not a declaration of self, but release from it. The practice of non-self also develops toughness. When failures happen, the ego gets crushed, perceiving events as personal failure. But when you let go of ego boundaries, failures are merely shifting conditions. They are part of the flow, not identity attacks. This attitude lets you adjust with flexibility to bounce back without the weight of wounded pride. Trust gets stronger when you know that your value is not attached to results, because there is no fixed self to be lost. Non-self also brings humility. If you believe in an independent self, it is very easy to feel proud thinking that your success is all yours. But when you observe how dependent life is, you are reminded that every achievement is the fruit of infinite causes, teachers, communities, nature, luck. This humility doesn't diminish you, but anchors you in thanksgiving. Trust develops when you realize that you are not having to do life by yourself, but are part of a great web of support. Another benefit of this teaching is the letting go of shame. Shame attaches to a fixed self. I am bad, I am broken, I am unworthy. But when you realize that self is not fixed, shame doesn't have a grip on you anymore. Errors are not evidence of a dysfunctional identity, but of a changeable situation. Non-self tells you that you are not locked in your worst self. You are changeable, full of potential for renewal. Trust increases when you realize that no error labels you forever, because there is no permanent self to label. Non-self also reconceptualizes morality. When ego holds on to self, morality is selfish, good actions for admiration, self-control for image, gifts for accolades. But when self dissolves, morality is spontaneous. Compassion flows not because you wish to be regarded as good, but because the distinction between you and others has dissolved. Aiding others is as natural as treating your own hand. Trust increases when you notice that goodness is not something that is imposed from outside, but springs forth from the understanding of non-separation. The practice of non-self also roots mindfulness stronger. When you hold on to self, you qualify every thought and feeling as mine. Anger is my anger. Fear is my fear. But if you notice that these are conditions that arise and pass, you are able to see them with less entanglement. Anger is just anger. Fear is just fear. They are not yours. This disidentification frees you to respond skillfully instead of reacting blindly. Trust develops when you notice that you do not have to be identified with fleeting states. This understanding also promotes trust in the universe at large. The ego attaches to self as if it is going out of style, but truly, life has always borne you along. Breathing happens without instruction. The heart beats effortlessly. The world turns without your doing. To let go of self is to understand that the world supports you even without your clinging. Trust naturally becomes an instinct when you realize that life is not based on the concept of self, but flourishes in its absence. Non-self also changes love. Love based on ego clings, holding on to the other, fearing loss, needing reassurance. But love born of non-self is expansive, unpossessive. It enables the other to grow, transform, be free. This love is not lessened by impermanence because it is not about possession. It is love as openness, as compassion, as sharing in the same river of life. Trust develops when you love without shackles. When you make love an expression of connection instead of possession. On a deeper level, non-self expresses ultimate trust, becoming one with the flow of the universe. As long as you hold on to self, you are resistant, attempting to define a little space of control. But when you release, you find that the flow itself is what moves you. Life isn't working against you, but through you. Each breath, each heartbeat, each thought is the universe in motion. To believe it is to let go of the illusion of separateness and find peace in belonging. So allow this truth to settle in your heart. Non-self is not loss, but freedom. It is the shedding of ego boundaries, the relaxing of separation, the dissolving into the current of existence. To practice non-self is to have complete trust, to shed the illusion of I and find the expansiveness that has always contained you. In that letting go, fear melts away, compassion opens wide, and trust becomes the natural state of being unlimited, fearless, and free. When the edges of self are gone, a new awareness emerges. The world you see isn't outside of you. The challenges you encounter, the habits you fight, the lessons you learn. These are not coincidences that only happen to you from the outside in. They are echoes, mirrors of what resides within. This is not superstition, but a deeper realization of interconnectedness. To trust the universe is to trust that each problem and each pleasure reveals something about your own heart. By coming to understand the world as mirror, you find that life itself is a teacher, constantly reflecting your internal states until you are ready to learn through them. The concept that the universe reflects your inner world can initially be disturbing. It suggests that what you resist externally may actually be rooted within, that the conflicts you face are not just about others, but also about the unexamined parts of yourself. Yet this is the very reason the teaching holds power. Rather than resenting, blaming, or resisting situations, you start to say, "What is this telling me? What am I learning in this moment?" When you change from viewing life as opposition to viewing it as a mirror of awareness, trust is built. One of the ways the reflection shows up is through relationships. The characteristics that anger you most about other people tend to illuminate the areas of yourself that you deny or repudiate. Anger over someone's pride can reveal underlying pride in yourself. Irritation at another's indolence can reveal your own fear of leisure or desire for perpetual productivity. Once you learn to interpret these mirrors, relationships cease to be boundless sources of agitation and are chances at self-standing. Others act as mirrors to reflect the universe, what is still unhealed in you. Trust increases when you see that these meetings are not punishments, but invitations to become more. Life challenges also reflect internal states. When you're stuck in patterns of failure, it might be hiding beliefs about unworthiness. When opportunities always slip through your fingers, it might be reflecting fear of fully stepping into your power. The world reflects back the assumptions you hold, not out of cruelty, but out of lessons. By seeing the reflection, you are able to shift inward, altering the very conditions that create your outside life. This is not blame but empowerment, the faith that your inner change radiates out through the web of life. The mirror also manifests itself in repeating patterns. When the same challenges keep reappearing again and again, it's not that the universe is pitted against you, but that the lesson has not been learned yet. The repetition is not torture, but persistence. Life keeps bringing the reflection until the dawn of awareness. Trust grows when you realize there are cycles to instruct, not to punish. Every recurrence is a chance to confront the same mirror with more wisdom, to change your reaction, and to end the cycle. The idea of the universe as mirror also mollifies judgment. When you witness suffering in another, rather than dismissing it, you see your own vulnerability staring back at you. Their suffering reminds you of your common humanity. When you witness goodness in others, it shows you the same capacity within yourself. Such awareness instills compassion because you no longer see others as fully separate from you. Trust develops when you see that what you observe in others always has a strand of yourself attached. The mirror does not just reflect weakness, but also strength. When you are inspired by someone's bravery, it is reflecting your own bravery in the making. When you see someone's heart, it reflects your own heart. Life constantly reflects to you not just what you need to heal, but what you already possess. To trust the universe as mirror is to trust that each meeting holds significance, sometimes a test, sometimes affirmation, always the chance to better see yourself. This lesson also changes your perspective regarding adversity. Rather than wondering why this is happening to me, you start wondering, what is this revealing to me about myself? Sickness, loss, failures, all can be mirrors. Sickness can reflect poor self-care. Loss can show you attachment. Disappointments can show you fear or distrust. These things hurt, yet in them is wisdom. The mirror does not temper truth, but lights it up and shows you where you must grow. Trust increases when you look at adversity not as meaningless turmoil, but as a kind of reflection showing you the way to wisdom. In meditation, this lesson is even more evident. The emotions and thoughts that come up are reflections of your internal reality. Desire, anger, joy, and fear all emerge from within, mirroring patterns and habits. By watching them without judgment, you start to see the internal forces driving your life. Meditation reveals to you that the mirror is not just outside but inside, in every emerging thought and feeling. Trust is established when you break down the fear of these mirrors and start to learn from them. The mirror also reflects ego illusions. When you crave attention, the universe will withhold it, demonstrating your need for approval. When you grasp for control, the universe will interfere with your designs, mirroring your refusal to let go. These mirrors reveal how the ego skews perception. Rather than denouncing them, you learn to thank them, since they show you the very points where freedom can be born. Trust increases when you perceive the world as not harsh but loving in its reflections. This lesson also changes how you interact with success. When life is smooth, it shows inner alignment. Rather than holding onto success or fearing loss of it, you are able to look at it as a reflection of alignment. The lesson is not to cling to it, but to observe the conditions that brought it to be. Balance, effort, openness, and to keep tending them. Deepens the trust when you see success, not as luck, but as reflection, reminding you of your own inner ability. The mirror principle applies to collective life as well. The wars, inequalities, and crises in society all reflect human patterns of greed, ignorance, fear, but also resilience, compassion, and creativity. When you see collective suffering, it reflects the unresolved patterns of humankind. When you see collective kindness, it reflects the goodness that remains. You build trust when you observe the challenges of the world as possibilities for collective awakening, not as signs of irreversible decline. This is also a call for accountability. To gaze in the mirror of the universe is to be held responsible for your internal state. If you always encounter anger on the outside, inquire where anger continues to reside within you. If you always encounter distrust, inquire how you withhold trust from yourself or someone else. This is not faulting but empowering. As you change within, you change what reflects outward. Trust grows when you see that you are not powerless but active in shaping the reflections you encounter. The exercise of this teaching demands honesty. It is simpler to blame others for everything rather than owning up to what their actions reflect about you. It is simpler to notice outer turbulence than to look for inner turbulence. But honesty will make the mirror unobstructed. By confronting it, you shatter illusions and become conscious. Trust comes when you stop shunning your own image and confront it with courage. This instruction also fosters gratitude. Even painful thoughts become blessings when you realize they are teachers. The challenging person who provokes you to anger is teaching you where patience is not. The failure that enrages you is teaching where attachment still lingers. Every thought, no matter how uncomfortable, becomes a teacher. Gratitude emerges not just for happiness, but for the mirrors that challenge you. Trust increases when you understand the universe reflects not to hurt, but to teach. With time, regarding the universe as mirror changes the way you live. Life is no longer about fighting circumstances, but about listening to them. Every moment turns into a dialogue, a conversation with existence itself. Rather than requesting the life to change, you inquire what it is demonstrating. This transformation substitutes frustration with curiosity, resistance with openness. Trust develops automatically when you live in conversation with the reflections of life. At its very heart, the universe as mirror indicates that there is no division between inner and outer. The world mirrors you because you are the world. The edges of self disappear, and what you see outside is only another form of the same reality. To believe this is to live in harmony with being, aware that every reflection, no matter how painful, contains meaning. So let this lesson take hold. The universe is not against you, but a reflection of you. Every difficulty, every instant teaches you something about your internal state. By discerning these reflections without distortion, you become wiser, kinder, and more trusting. The mirror is ever there, just waiting for you to look, not with dread, but with openness. And within that reflection, you see that the universe has been showing you the way the entire time. When you learn to perceive the universe as a mirror, reflecting your inner world through each moment of encounter, you also come to see that the final reflection is mortality itself. Nothing more clearly reminds us of impermanence than death. And yet, most people approach death like an intruder, something to exclude, deny, or be afraid of. Buddhism has something quite different to teach, that it is not morbid, but freeing to contemplate death. To confront the reality of dissolution with open eyes is to find a profounder faith that death is not the termination of life, but a change, a return into the limitless flow of being. Death reflection starts with integrity. Since the moment of birth, death is the soul's certainty. The rest, health, wealth, loved ones, status, are uncertain. To deny this truth is to live in illusion, constantly surprised when endings come. To contemplate death is to align with reality, to see clearly that everything you cherish will change, that your body will one day fail, that this chapter of life will close. Yet within this sobering truth lies profound freedom. When you stop pretending permanence exists, you can finally live fully. Faith in change arises when you come to the understanding that death belongs to the same rhythm as birth. The body is not annihilated, but cycled back to the elements: water, earth, fire, air, recycling into new forms. Breath departs one body to become part of the greater atmosphere, nourishing life elsewhere. Atoms that comprise you are old, created in the heart of stars, and they will persist onward long after this body perishes. To have faith in death is to have faith in this continuity to ensure that nothing is really lost, only changed. This reflection also changes your dynamic with fear. Fear of death lies behind so many fears. Fear of failing, of getting sick, of losing something, of not knowing. Fundamentally, they are all fears of change. By facing directly into death, you remove the strength from fear. You understand that fear feeds on avoidance. But when you confront death, you can see it for what it is. Inevitable, unstoppable, yet natural. Trust is established when fear is substituted with acceptance. When you no longer fight the rhythm of life, thinking about death also makes things simpler. Most of human existence is spent pursuing possessions, status, or recognition, as though these will bring enduringness. But when you recall that death is inevitable, these things lose their hold on you. What becomes significant is not accumulation, but meaningful relationships, compassion, presence, wisdom. The consciousness of death makes your eyes clear, piercing distractions. When you realize that the value in life is not what you possess, but how you live, trust deepens. This lesson also grows compassion. When you recall that all people will die, pride diminishes. The one who provokes you, the stranger you ignore, the loved one you hold on to, all are destined for the same fate. Death levels, showing common vulnerability. This understanding mutes judgment and intensifies compassion. To consider death is to look within each other for yourself, so that you know all are traveling the same journey. Trust develops when you let this perception grow into compassion for all life. Contemplation of death also yields thankfulness. Every breath, every moment, every encounter is treasured when you realize it won't last. Rather than taking life for granted, you enjoy it. The beauty of morning light, the ring of laughter, the feel of friendship all glow more against the shadow of mortality. Thankfulness turns mundane moments into jewels. Trust is engendered when you release demands for perpetuity and begin to respect the transitory elegance of each day. This exercise also melts attachment. Killing is born out of the illusion that we can possess things for all time. Death reveals this to be impossible. All possessions, all jobs, all loves must one day be surrendered. To look at death is to get the heart ready to surrender, not with resentment, but with compassion. Trust arises when you realize the surrendering is not annihilation, but making space for new change. When you meditate on death, deep peace can result. Imagining your own death, not in terror, but in acceptance, you pierce illusion. You look at the body as ephemeral, fleeting, a vehicle that will ultimately return to the soil. This consideration creates not despair, but liberation. It liberates you from the futile labor of locking up the insecure. Trust grows when you are at peace in the knowledge that death and life are not adversaries, but dance partners in the same movement. This discipline also reorients you to time. When you avoid death, you squander time in distraction, thinking there are infinite tomorrows. But when you recall death, time is valuable. You cease delaying love, forgiveness, or joy. You utter the words that should be said. Do the things you have been unable to bring yourselves to do. Live with haste, with peace as your moderator. Trust comes when you cease expecting life to start and hold the present as your sole certainty. Thinking about death also breaks the delusion of control. So much pain stems from the idea that you can control all outcomes, shield yourself against loss or prevent endings. But death is the biggest eye-opener, that we only have so much control. To believe in death is to embrace that life cannot be controlled, but only endured. This brings peace, because you let go of the weight of impossible control and settle into the flow of conditions. Death also teaches equanimity. Just as birth has not been chosen, death will arise even without a wish. To prepare for death is to develop balance, to greet both joy and sorrow with openness, believing that both will pass. This balance keeps one from despair in suffering and greed in joy. Trust is established more when you live in the middle, not holding on to one side nor avoiding the other, since you both know they are temporary. One other gift of suffering is that it erodes arrogance. In the smooth times, there is so much pride that comes quickly from the belief you are invincible, self-sufficient, above being touched. Suffering brings you down, reminding you of vulnerability. This humility is not about lessening you, but about opening you. When you release your need to pretend you are in control, you are more open to help, more appreciative of aid, more empathetic toward others. The universe employs pain to shatter the shell of ego, so that love may flow more freely. Suffering also instructs in surrender. The ego struggles always to oppose pain, to redefine conditions, to insist on reality, bend to desire. But suffering illustrates the uselessness of this struggle. In learning to accept that which cannot be altered, you realize peace. Acceptance is not resignation, but alignment. It is wisdom in letting life be what it is, even when challenging. Trust increases when you understand that surrender does not take away from you, but enhances your ability to live fully. Reflecting on suffering also brings out the importance of being present. Most pain is magnified by the tales the mind constructs. Dwell on the past, dreading the future. Yet, when you come back to this moment, the weight often drops. One breath, even in sorrow, can be peaceful. One step, even in bereavement, can be firm. The loving universe is a teacher of presence that reminds you that life happens only in the present moment. Your trust will grow when you learn that even in adversity, presence has peace. This viewpoint also redefines failure. Rather than viewing failure as proof of being inadequate, you view failure as a guide. Every failure deflects, showing you routes that no longer work and creating space for new ones. The universe employs failure to break attachment to fixed ideas, to stretch imagination, to create strength. Trust is when you recognize that failure is not a conclusion, but an instruction, one that usually has more insight than success. Suffering also promotes appreciation of joy. Without contrast, however, joy may go unnoticed. The taste of relief following pain, the richness of laughter following grief, the radiance of friendship after solitude, all are enhanced by contrast with suffering. The world employs darkness to make light shine more visibly. Faith builds when you realize that even pain increases your ability to value happiness. This lesson also changes the way that you accompany others in their pain. Without faith in the value of suffering, you might move too quickly to repair or downplay it, giving empty comfort. But when you understand suffering as portal, you can stay with others in their pain without anxiety, giving presence instead of illusory solutions. This presence expresses the universe's own mercy, greeting suffering not with evasion, but with love. In meditation, suffering is viewed as energy flowing through the body and mind. Rather than calling it bad, you watch sensations, thoughts, and feelings emerging and vanishing. This immediate experience shows suffering as conditioned and transitory. Its ability to label you disappears. Trustfulness develops when you no longer find yourself in suffering, but view it as waves breaking on the surface of the ocean of awareness. The loving universe also reminds us that meaning may not be immediate. Sometimes suffering seems meaningless, its teachings obscured. Faith requires believing that even invisible the process is molding you. Sometimes what makes sense comes only later, when you see the resilience, humility, or kindness forged through adversity. The compassion of the universe is not always apparent in the moment, but it is always active. Finally, to have faith in suffering as redemptive is to follow the Buddha's path himself. His own enlightenment did not start with the rejection of dukkha, but with complete acceptance of it. Through the recognition of suffering, he found the path beyond it. This way, dukkha is not a hindrance, but the foundation of freedom. Faith is greater when you know your own suffering. Whatever its weight can be the portal to awakening if approached by awareness and compassion. So let this truth sink in. The universe is not careless but kind, molding you in suffering as in joy. Dukkha is not punishment but path, not brutality but direction. Any wound can open to wisdom. Any loss can grow compassion. Any struggle can deepen faith. To accept suffering as meaningful is to trust the universe in its deepest way. To understand that even suffering holds within it the potential of awakening, and that all you go through is not lost in the grand tapestry of life. When you start to believe that even pain has purpose, another symbol comes from Buddhist tradition, the lotus. Coincidence has it that this flower, renowned for its beauty and innocence, only blooms in muck. Thick, dark, and untidy is the muck, but out of it comes the lotus, unsoiled in its radiance. This is poetry more than an image. It is a strong reminder that wisdom itself arises from adversity. To have faith in the lotus in mud is to have faith that your worst times are not lost, but are the very dirt where growth begins. Mud is the circumstances most of us would love to bypass: loss, confusion, despair, grief, failure, and fear. But these same conditions give rise to the nutrients for awakening. Without mud, there is no lotus. Without strife, there is no depth of knowledge. The compassionate universe we discussed previously shows its truth again here. Life does not squander pain, but converts it into the soil of wisdom. Faith in this process is what keeps you from fearing darkness and viewing it as a place of secret potential. Every single human being has mud. Some have the mud of trauma, some the mud of regret, some the mud of longing or isolation. It is tempting to cover it up, to deny it exists, or to think it makes you not worth anything. But the lotus has another way. Mud is not something to be ashamed of. It is the raw material for growth. Trust increases when you cease to fight against your own darkness and let it feed the potential for change. This lesson changes the way you view adversity. Rather than wondering, "Why do I have to suffer?" you start to wonder, "What can I learn from this suffering?" The mud is no longer heavy but wise. Grief teaches compassion and impermanence. Failure teaches resilience and humility. Fear teaches bravery. Every type of mud, when approached openly, holds within itself the seeds of enlightenment. Faith increases when you know that however dense the mud, the lotus is still a possibility. Lotus also stands for purity, not because it does not come in contact with the mud, but because it emerges out of it without being soiled. Similarly, wisdom does not imply the avoidance of suffering, but altering your relationship with it. Pain can occur, but you don't have to be defined by it. Darkness can be around you, but it does not define your soul. Trust comes about when you realize that your center is not touched, like the lotus that flowers over the mud. This symbol also talks to resilience. The lotus takes time to bloom. It struggles slowly through mud, reaching towards light, nourished by the same mud that looks to hold it back. Growth in life works the same way. Healing and transformation take time, patience, and perseverance. Having faith in the process is being certain that even when progress is not seen, growth is occurring beneath the surface. What appears to be stagnation could be roots becoming deeper, waiting to bloom. The lotus to mud journey also eradicates despair. Most people have the perception that their wounds disqualify them from wisdom or peace. However, the lotus teaches the contrary. It is only because of wounds that wisdom arises. Compassion does not arise where soil remains untouched. Compassion arises where there is mud in pain and loss. Strength does not arise where there is ease. Strength arises where there is hardship. The lotus sighs that your challenges do not destroy you. They mold you. Faith comes when you are convinced that even your darkest pages can create light. This lesson also reconfigures your perception of others. When you see someone stuck in their own mud, it is natural to judge or dismiss them. But the lotus teaches you that under their mud is the potential for wisdom and beauty. By looking at others not just for their mud, but also their invisible lotus, you exercise compassion. Trust comes when you apply this view to all people, knowing nobody is beyond improvement. The lotus also represents patience with imperfection. The flower doesn't bloom overnight. The gradual rising through water and mud is its way of blossoming. Similarly, human awakening is not instantaneous perfection, but the unfolding. Each step, each struggle, each tiny shift is on the path. Trust deepens when you cease to expect instant change and respect the slow unfolding of the lotus within. In meditation, the teaching is experienced directly. If your mind is troubled by restlessness, anger, or sorrow, you may feel stuck in mud, but by relaxing with awareness, you find that stillness gradually cleanses the mind. The mud does not become an obstacle, but the very state that teaches patience, strength, and compassion. Every session becomes a reenactment of the lotus rising darkness, transforming into clarity. The mud lotus also demonstrates the balance between acceptance and aspiration. You accept mud as present in your life, but you will not sink into it. You aspire to rise up, to bloom, to become the wisdom and compassion. This balance itself is trust in accepting the present without despair and in moving to grow without impatience. This photograph also erases shame. Most of us walk around with guilt or regret as indelible marks, but the lotus teaches us that mud is not mark. It is earth. What you thought of as your defects or flops can be the very earth of change. Shame starts to lose its hold when you realize that nothing in your history excludes you from expansion. Trust comes when you reframe your narrative as the gradual flowering of a lotus out of mud. Together, this symbol is also used for societies. Communities stuck in conflict, inequality, or oppression might be feeling stuck in mud. Still, we know that magnificent justice and compassion movements often emerge exactly from suffering. The mud of pain is the seedbed from which transformation blooms. Trust grows when you notice that common mud, even black, can catalyze common lotus. The lotus also instructs us in humility. Nobody flowers without mud. The most enlightened beings did not bypass suffering but transmuted it. Even the enlightenment of the Buddha sprouted from his profound experience with dukkha. This reality humbles us all. Suffering is not failure, but the dawn of awakening. Trust comes when you cease to fight mud and start respecting it as the soil from which wisdom arises. Lastly, the lotus teaches hope. Regardless of how deep the mud gets, the chance to bloom is still there, even when the world is getting too much. When the darkness feels like it's here to stay, the lotus reminds you that growth can come out of the very spot you'd least expect it. Trust is built when you know that your struggles are not the end of your story, but the soil of transformation. So let this teaching settle in you. The mud is not your enemy, but your teacher. It is the earth out of which arise compassion, strength, humility, and wisdom. The lotus flower does not bloom despite the mud, but because of the mud. To believe in the lotus in mud is to believe that your darkest night holds the seeds of awakening, that beauty and strength arise out of suffering, and that the universe never squanders your pain, but turns it into the compost of growth. You have now traversed the strongest teachings Buddhism has on having faith in the universe. From releasing control to realizing karma as connection, to accepting impermanence, interdependence, compassion, patience, non-attachment, the wisdom of suffering, the elegance of growth in darkness, the assistance of community, the paradox of effort and surrender, the radical strength of being present, and ultimately the freedom that comes with dissolving the self into the flow of life itself. Each has been pointing to the same thing. The universe isn't against you. It is carrying you. Trust isn't blind faith, but open engagement with a reality that is shaping, changing, and carrying you every moment. When you let go of fear, relax attachment, and settle into awareness, you realize that you were never apart. You were always part of the great unfolding. If these words resonated with your heart, I'd be grateful to hear from you. Pass on in the comments which lesson spoke to you most and how you can start working on it in your own life. Your thoughts not only enrich your own path, but might also be the mirror another needs tonight. And if you would like to keep walking this way with us, do subscribe and enable the notifications so you don't miss the next step in uncovering more wisdom, peace, and power within yourself and with the universe. Now rest deeply, breathe gently, and let the universe support you. This exercise also brings out the value of human life. Of all the possible forms of life, you have emerged with a body and mind that can reflect, feel, and become awake. Death reflection reminds you not to squander this short chance. It encourages you to develop wisdom and compassion while you are still able. Trust increases when you value life as holy, just because it is limited. The certainty of death also changes your perception of legacy. No longer do you focus on holding onto things or structures, but rather you look at legacy as the ripple effects of your actions. The generosity you showed, the wisdom you imparted, the empathy you had. These extend beyond death, not as belongings, but as effects in the fabric of existence. Trust comes when you realize that your life counts not by what you have, but by the seeds you sow in other people. This reflection also mends fear of the unknown. Death is feared because it can't be known. But Buddhism says that not knowing is not failure. It is openness. Just like you came into life without knowing, you will exit life the same way. You trust death is to trust the unknown, to be at rest in mystery without insisting on warranties. This letting go is the greatest faith, the act of entering into dissolution with openness instead of fear. Confronting death also changes the way you care for others. When family and friends are at the end of life, fear and denial tend to be overwhelming. But when you have faced death yourself, you can greet them with peaceful presence, giving them acceptance rather than avoidance. You become a place of strength where others can learn to trust in transformation. This service is one of the greatest demonstrations of compassion, to walk alongside another into the unknown without fear. The contemplation of death also casts light upon rebirth, not just in the physical sense from one lifetime to another, but in the constant renewal of life itself. Death and birth live in every moment. Cells are dying and being born. Breaths cease and begin. Thoughts disintegrate and emerge. By understanding death as a part of ongoing change, you see that life is not fixed, but moving. Trust grows when you observe death is integrated into life as an entrance to rebirth, rather than extinction. Finally, death contemplation is the practice of waking up. To recall death is to live intensely, to let go, clinging to savor each moment, to act with compassion, to forgive, to love. Death is not distinct from life, but its deepest teacher. Through contemplation, you convert fear into trust, denial into thanks, resistance into peace. Let this teaching settle in you. Death is not the end, but the final metamorphosis. To believe in death is to believe in the rhythm of life, the predictability of decomposition, and the surety of rebirth. When you let go of fear and embrace mortality, you find freedom, courage, and profound peace. Death is no longer a foe, but appears as the universe's highest lesson in trust, leading you to live life now and move into the unknown with a heart full of courage. When the reflection on death instructs you that breaking down is not destruction but change, yet another truth starts to come through the cracks of fear. Suffering itself is not for nothing. To meet death calmly is already to realize that pain doesn't just exist to beat you down, but to wake you up. This brings us into the core of one of Buddhism's most radical teachings, that the universe itself is compassionate, not in the mawkish sense of sparing you from adversity, but in the more profound sense of taking every moment, even pain, as a means to awakening. To trust this is to have faith that dukkha, the universal experience of discontent, is not penalty but instruction. Suffering in all its myriad forms cannot be avoided. Bodies become sick, relationships break down, projects fall apart, loved ones leave. Nothing can buy you out of these facts. To refuse suffering is to be in a state of continuous shock whenever it occurs. But to look at suffering clearly is to see it as teacher. The first of the Buddha's noble truths was not a call to despair, but to integrity. Life has dukkha. To have faith in the compassion of the universe is to know that this truth, however painful, is the gate to freedom. The compassionate universe is not hiding suffering from you. It shows it so that you may wake up. If all were perpetually enjoyable, there would be no need to question, no need to dig deeper. Comfort lures the mind into ease. Suffering breaks this fantasy, compelling you to witness impermanence and interdependence face to face. When things go wrong, you are faced with impermanence. When relationships become tenuous, you are faced with attachment. When the body weakens, you are faced with death. Each pain opens you to a more profound law. Trust emerges when you view suffering not as senseless cruelty, but as the mirror reflecting you back to truth. This reinterpretation changes the manner in which you encounter adversity. Rather than wondering, "Why is this happening to me?" you start wondering, "What is this teaching me?" The sickness that compels you to slow down can show you how much you are burning yourself out in the pursuit of status. The disappointment that breaks your illusions can show you the extent of clinging you took for love. The defeat that hurts your pride can show you how much your self-esteem was based on tenuous results. All kinds of suffering have in them the seed of wisdom. Trust comes when you stop pushing away the lesson, but go with it. Suffering also grows compassion. When you have experienced pain, you see it in others. This awareness mollifies judgment and encourages empathy. The universe employs your own scars to bind you closer to the human race. A loving heart is seldom created out of comfort alone. It is forged by loss, by hardship, by failure. To believe in the universe's benevolence is to recognize that even your suffering can expand your heart, open doors of compassion that would otherwise be shut. The lesson also shows the pointlessness of avoidance. Most of human energy is devoted to attempting escape from pain by distraction, addiction, denial, or control. But avoidance complicates suffering. The empathetic universe permits no permanent escape because escape keeps you asleep. By bringing suffering back over and over, life encourages you to confront it directly, to stop running, to learn. Trust increases when you observe that pain continues not to hurt, but to awake, and that only by confronting it with awareness can freedom start. Dukkha also sheds light on impermanence. Suffering occurs because we hold on to what is changing: youth, health, belongings, relationships. Suffering brings to mind the reality that grasping cannot stop loss. This awareness is painful, but it is liberating once you notice that nothing can be grasped. You cease to wear yourself out with vain grasping. Rather, you find how to greet life with outstretched hands, loving without holding on, letting go without despair. The world teaches this lesson kindly sometimes and severely at other times, but always in the interest of unveiling freedom. Believing in suffering as teacher also instills patience. Development is seldom sudden. Harsh situations tend to persist, enticing you to despair. But even in lengthy battles, something realigns beneath the surface. Strength is developed. Viewpoint is expanded. Resilience becomes profound. In retrospect, you usually notice that the toughest times were also the most life-changing. The loving universe does not hurry the lesson, but lets things come to maturity until the moment of understanding blooms. Trust happens when you refrain from insisting on immediate relief and begin to respect the slow ripening of wisdom. This lesson extends also to group suffering, wars, disparities, ecological crises. These are manifestations of collective ignorance, greed, fear. Though they are shattering, they also happen to be mirrors, confronting humanity with its own darkness. The compassionate universe does not create such crises, but leaves their emergence to reveal the price of ignorance. Group dukkha becomes the basis for collective awakening. Trust is deepened as you realize that even world suffering holds the potential for change.